And we are live. This is Dark Journalist. Oh, what a fantastic crowd we have out there in the ideas room already tonight. Of course, I am joined by the lovely Olivia.
Hi, everybody.
And Olivia, we have made it to 4 years of the X series. Incredible as it may seem, of exploring the X steganography with our viewers there in the research ideas room. And it's fascinating the things that have unfolded over the period of that time. And there's going to be a little bit of some stringing that together with this very important episode tonight, which is X-122. We're talking about Autec and the mystery search for Atlantis with Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein playing very interesting roles. But I guess that's typical X fare, isn't it? Mm-hmm. I want to say also one of the most important things that have come up over the course of this 4 years of doing this is that this has been a moving diagram where, we've put out a certain amount of information around it and the world has kind of coalesced around that information. And, we found things register and it's almost like bouncing off the ideas field and that echo coming back to us. So things from Nixon and Trump and other things that we've revealed in this show that just weren't public at the time. And a lot of that has to do with the time that we're in. And I have to say that the rolling out of the X aspect as a part of our consciousness looking at this, of course, there's lots of different types of steganography. But the X-STEGANOGRAPHY is particularly important to this period in time, and there's a huge mystery school tie-in. There's a huge tie-in, of course, with the UFO file, and there's another major tie-in which has to do with the framework around why the X was invented as steganography in the first place, which goes all the way back to the Egyptian mystery schools and Pythagoras and beyond. And I think we've done a pretty interesting job of laying that out. I'm not going to try to capture all that tonight, but I do want to say that some of the things that we've been able to do here show that a dedicated group armed with the right ideas constitutes a majority. And we certainly have been bringing those truths home. And tonight is going to be particularly important because it's going to open up a new field of inquiry while building on something that the research that we've called the HotZone research, which has to do with locations around the Bahamas, Cuba, and Yucatan area, and all the interesting little hijinks that go on in relation to that, including the fact that there are large swaths of the undersea world that are completely stemming with ancient ruins, and that has to be cut off and covered up in order for the games to play out. And of course, our name is Dark Journalist and the game is X-STEGANOGRAPHY, so we're going to join in that game and reveal these truths for you. And it's amazing against the backdrop of very strange activity in the news. What you got?
Everybody's mentioning your smoking jacket.
Well, I had to do something special for the anniversary, and I have to say that this has always been one of my favorites. And it's a great, fantastic crowd tonight. I really want to emphasize that we're very grateful to have the ability to study these things with you, and that tonight is special in that regard because of that dedicated conversation that we're having, which is exactly the kind of conversation that we see being stamped out everywhere, and the intense censorship that we've been able to navigate ever so interestingly around very hot, controversial topics as we get to the point over and over again. So many people have said to us, oh, you need to abandon this platform for that platform and all that. The platform wars are very interesting, and that's fine. But, what I've come here to do is deliver the message of this work and give it to you. And so, if somebody like a major company on the social media side decides to take those moves, we've really developed this with our mailing list, where if you're on that mailing list, we'll have that direct relationship with you. And I'd let them take the first move. I'm not going to remove myself from any particular platform. I actually enjoy the challenge of staying right in there and getting the biggest possible delivery of the message of this show. The other thing I want to point out is, if it came right down to it, I would stream right off my iPhone, so I'm going to do this work no matter what platform is operational at the time. And, the best way for us to stay in touch, of course, is for you guys to be on that newsletter, which you can sign up for free at darkjournalist.com. And I highly recommend that you do that. So I'm going to have a lot to cover tonight with Ghislaine and Autec. And we're going to be taking questions in the second part of the show. And then we're going to have part 2 of this episode. You're not going to have to wait a week for it, because this is a 2-part extravaganza for our 4-year anniversary. That means tomorrow night, 8 o'clock, you're all back here with us again. All right. And so before I leap in, you guys can all ask questions, of course, now. We'll take them in the second part of the show, but Miss Olivia will be putting those together. How's the temperature out there?
Great. I mean, nobody can talk about anything except your jacket.
It's picking up the light. I can see that for sure. Well, give me something.
Just so people know, it is authentic, vintage, Rat Pack.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Silk Shenton.
Wouldn't be anything but. I mean, you're going to have to, if you're going to find those influences with me, you're going to find them very anchored in the early 60s. I do want to say also that it's one of the things that's been remarkable to watch over the course of time of doing this show is bringing things forward and then having them sort of echo back in the world. Everything from, remember Madonna's tour, Madame X. And there's so much steganography that, the way steganography works is it has to be out there in the open. So it's very easy to just say, oh, that's something, it's going on. It has the name X, big deal. And I want you to think like that, actually. I don't want this to be one of those games where we're chasing around after X. What I've been able to do is compile over 250 references in secret programs relating to X steganography and how those programs would go black on the aerospace side, and the way that they were able to move them through various government agencies was to use these X monikers. And one of the most important ones, of course, is the X-15, which still holds the manned flight record for a space plane. And even though it was set in 1961, that plane was developed by Walter Dornberger, former Nazi and the head of Bell Aerospace. So there's a lot of reasons why that X becomes interesting to us. And over the course of 4 years and laying this out, I think we've been able to tie those things in. And I want to say that in terms of steganography, it is throughout the culture. The way that steganography is most well known right now is through software pixels, and how you'll have a whole picture and then one of the pixels will have a code in it, and somebody's looking at it and it just looks like some guy smiling by a waterfall. But for people who know how to look for that pixel, they're looking at that pixel. It's very much the same situation for us. And a lot of that steganography goes back to a figure named Johannes Trithemius, who's really a remarkable priest in his era. And, we'll be going back there to like the 15th century. Eventually, this is the same individual who would hide scrolls, and they would be recovered and would form the basis of the Golden Dawn. And the idea there was he had some really incredible esoteric realizations and had come across some incredible knowledge. But he realized that if he wrote it down under ordinary circumstances, that he basically would have been burned at the stake. So he decided, instead of getting prosecuted, that he would use a whole system of steganography in order to bring these truths out. And that book that he left behind about steganography is still the fundamental formula for steganography. And what he says, it goes back to the Greeks in that the term represented a page within a page. And that's the way we need to look at the things that we're studying here. Some of the steganography we've been able to cover involves the mystery schools and their observations around the ancient culture of Atlantis, which is something that we in this period of time are going to be able to see and have the opportunity to grasp. And that's some of that X-steganography resides in the UFO file, because it relates to a certain type of technology, and that is X technology. And we hear hints of it, and we see it coming through these different aerospace companies. And then there's the other piece, which relates to Theosophy and the mystery schools that came forward at the end of the 19th century. They were carrying a legacy, and they were trying to let out the X steganography and let out those truths without disrupting the culture, but helping to move the culture forward. So this is the nature of the situation we found ourselves in. what we've been able to do on this show is bring forward the mission of the mystery schools and the types of things that they laid out for us that kind of went off a cliff sometime around 1925 to 1930. And they were predicted around 1920 by Rudolf Steiner to have a chance, an opportunity in 100 years to come back. And now here we are in that window, and you find yourself surrounded by some of the most interesting ideas and people on this. And, Gigi Young, of course, is one of them. And following her work really opens up some of this as well. The work of Joseph Farrell. I can tell you, even 10 or 15 years ago, that work wasn't really out there in the way that it is now. There's a real opportunity with this. And I think one of the things that the show has done is we've given currency to the things that the mystery schools have brought forward, like ideas like the Eighth Sphere, ideas like Ahriman. I'm not saying that those ideas weren't out there or those books didn't exist, but they weren't brought forward, I think, in a way that we needed in this period. We've been able to extrapolate that out, and that goes along again with the great guests that we've had on the program, including Ilana Freeland and Gigi Young, Joseph Farrell, Catherine Austin Fitz, and others. And what's interesting is it's the 4th anniversary of the X series, but we've been doing the Dark Journalist show since, the Agent Oswald documentary is from 2014 now. So,
and it totally stands up.
So that's 8 years at least, right? And in that period of time, we've lost a lot of the incredible voices. Jim Mars, for example, was a remarkable voice on this. And we had a number of shows with him. I talked to Jim quite often and got great information from him when he was available. And a lot of that was offline. And, I learned a lot just from speaking with him. People like Stanton Friedman, we lost, who was the nuclear physicist who had become very interested in the UFO file and brought forward these things. And Paul Hellyer was another one, the defense minister from Canada, who really laid all that out for us way before any of the TTSA and any of that CIA junk got on the radar. And one of the things that I think is important to note is that in this period when there's been a big push by the Central Intelligence Agency to co-opt the UFO file and to co-opt the players around that, which has been particularly disturbing, we've held very firm in pointing out that the Central Intelligence Agency is not the place to go to for UFO disclosure, and that the folks around that, like Lou Elizondo and the TTSA people, are playing a game. And, that's why they have these network shows and, $1 million book deals and documentaries. A lot of that is interesting to me because the CIA can do that when they're trying to push something through. The latest thing they're trying to push through that we've been noticing is that these CIA guys are, they're saying, I had abduction experiences, these aliens took me. Look, we have people, real people, who've had real encounters and abduction experiences. That's where the emphasis should go. Forget about CIA players. So when guys like John Ramirez comes out and says, I was abducted in 1992, I don't believe you because I don't believe the Central Intelligence Agency. By the nature of the organization, we're not going to believe the Central Intelligence Agency. So one of the crucial...
Because could I just say,
yeah,
who do they recruit? The best liars on the planet.
There's no question. And they, by the mere fact of their job, and the fact that it's an extra constitutional organization. But let's suppose it was under the Constitution. Their job would be counterintelligence, and it would be constantly fooling the enemy about what you were doing. So they're not going to give out those types of details. I'm sorry. And for people who had the TTSA and were high-fiving and all that stuff, it's stupid. I mean, the TTSA went $50 million into debt. They bought themselves a show on the History Channel, and it came in at 53rd place in its slot. So you can see that whole thing was a weird setup, and we went on record and took a lot of fire for that. The interesting thing is, I don't care. And I'm glad to take criticism for taking a stand on things. That's what dark journalism is all about. Look, any good investigative in journalism is adversarial. It has to, by the very nature. If you're investigating a corporation that's dumping nuclear waste into rivers, that's going to be an adversarial relationship when you're looking into it. And you shouldn't have kid gloves when you go after it. It should never be personal, but you have to be ready to get out there and really mix it up. And that's what I think the attitude that we need in the UFO side is exactly like that, to respectfully get those ideas out. But you don't let the CIA roll in and take over a field. That's just not going to happen, not on our watch. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show. This is our 4th anniversary of the X series, and we're doing X series 122, which is all about Autec and the mystery search for Atlantis. We're going to be taking your questions in the second half of the program, and this is Autec in the HotZone. Ghislaine's down there in the HotZone along with Jeffrey Epstein, and we know that Epstein has passed along and is no longer with us, but Ghislaine is still with us, and it's quite an enigma hanging out there in prison. I'm going to say why her prison stay is such an enigma, along with the immediate things she was doing just before she was grabbed for this human trafficking role that she played along with Jeffrey Epstein. And we'll take, like I said, we'll take your questions in the second half. Okay, before we get there, how's the temperature out there?
Fantastic. Do you want any... Actually,
are they still on about the jacket or not?
Well, kind of. As people join, they all have to make a comment about it.
Excellent.
WC Ray wants to know, can DJ please give us a short Dr. Farrell update?
Yes. Dr. Farrell, I spoke to him recently. He's doing well. He's recovering. He's put out a number of blogs and already is doing, the Nefarium shows as well, those updates. I don't think the doctors recommended that, but he's right back at work, and he's been doing them right off of his website, gizadeathstar.com, because YouTube gave him some kind of a timeout for the next month or so, and we've been seeing them do that kind of thing, during periods like the Ukraine war. You don't want somebody who's a truth teller like Dr. Farrell out there leveling the field. So they want just gangbusters, just like when the COVID op got into full swing and they really needed everybody to just say the same thing. Now we know so much of that story is falling apart, and guys like Fauci are really, they're looking as bad as they should look. There was recently a motion that was put forward by Rand Paul, in fact, on this track to remove Dr. Fauci from his position and split his position into 3 different people, which I think is an excellent idea. It failed in the Senate, and 5 Republicans voted along with all the Democrats. We should really note those 5 Republicans' name and make sure that they're out of office, because, Susan Collins in Maine was one of them for sure. Lisa Murkowski in Alaska. Those people love to get wrapped up in the fascist tactics behind the mandates and all that stuff, and they should be voted out in 2022 for sure. So I think this is something that's crucial. But yeah, he's doing great. He's doing really great. And the other thing I want to point out before we get started, there's going to be so many different brainwashing memes floated out there about the war aspect that's going on. We can't ignore it when we speak about it. One thing I want to say in relation to it is that the setup, so much of this has been set up for decades. The World Economic Forum, of course, is involved very deeply. And there was a big push during the Obama administration to put NATO on Putin's doorsteps. Bad idea. And Putin has been keeping his powder dry, for a long time on this. And he took the bait, actually, around the situation and rolled tanks and armaments into the Ukraine. But the slapback from this and the blowback from this, really has to do with the Central Intelligence Agency being so involved in Ukraine and getting us into this hostility. This is what they're experts at. But unfortunately, Russia themselves are making it more difficult as well. So you get the CIA doing this puppeteering on one side, and they're using Zelensky as their puppet. And this whole idea of the promotion of Zelensky as this great hero and stuff. I think that the people who put him in there put him in a pretty uncomfortable position. That's for sure. But nonetheless, he's a World Economic Forum guy, like Justin Trudeau, admires Justin Trudeau. And, Trudeau is just a fascist there running Canada with a very small minority that is leading Canada. And we saw during the trucker piece, which, of course, is also a widely manipulated story. Whenever we turn, there's the COVID op or the trucker convoy or the war in Ukraine, there's layers of misinformation. So that's why going back to the fundamental core of understanding the WEF and the CIA and their involvement in trying to kind of create this global superstructure is crucial. And that's some of the important things, that understanding of the deep state in our minds, And I've had people in the brainwashed conversations who are just like, that's Zelensky. He's like a modern day Churchill or something. No, I mean, this guy was an actor that they grabbed. And he actually, as we know, played the president of Ukraine before they even put him in there. He had no political background. And that was a very short campaign where they just, the CIA just dropped him in. And there's an excellent documentary of the situation before that, which has been really heavily censored. And it's Oliver Stone's Ukraine on Fire, which is from 2016. So it's before this whole mess. I highly recommend it. I think it gives us some background on what's actually happening there. One of the important voices, I think, on all of these topics is Professor Peter Dale Scott, as we brought forward his work. And he's been on the show many times in the last few years. And one of the points that he made is that, Ukraine has been very divided for decades, and that the deep state is really taking advantage of this. But in any case, he couldn't believe the one-sidedness of the coverage and just the pure demonization of Russia and not considering any of the balances, checks and balances on this. And Russia has done themselves in a way by the way that they've pursued it, because when you're going after a population and you're a bigger aggressor country, it's going to just look like that no matter what you do or how justified you think you are. But nonetheless, there are a lot of security promises and things that we could have extended further to avoid this whole situation. At this point, the media has been trying to make it sound cool to have a nuclear exchange. I kid you not. So, what we need to do is encourage the walking back and not crowing over any victories that happen in the short run with that, but encouraging the walking back and not letting the CIA whip us all up into a global conflict, which is what their goal is. And so that's a very crucial piece. And also, don't believe the hype. Remember that song? Don't believe the hype. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. Whew, it's a great crowd that is shuttling in. We are going to be rolling out here with X-122. And we're going to start with Autec. And what is Autec anyway? Well, this is really interesting. Autec is called the Underwater Area 51, and it resides right there in the HotZone off Andros Island. Now, Andros is particularly interesting because the first sort of major structures around the Bahamas that indicated there was an ancient culture there were found right off of Andros. The Andros platform is one of them. So there's a lot of ancient ruins right there, and of course, just a pitch throw across is the island of Bimini, which the Edgar Cayce readings emphasized as being one of the highlands there left over of Atlantis. And he actually indicated in several readings that there was a structure rising, a Poseidon temple, off the north edge of Bimini. Eventually, we found the Bimini Road in the same year pinpointed by Edgar Cayce, 1968. That's crucial because nobody was really talking about Bimini in 1930. It wasn't really on the map. And shortly after some of these Cayce readings, you have some very interesting people showing up there, like Ernest Hemingway. Well, we've done a series of HotZone shows indicating that Ernest Hemingway knew a great deal about the Atlantean culture through the Edgar Cayce readings because his mother was very close with the Cayces. And that's something we brought forward on this program, that Grace Hemingway actually had a relationship and got readings from Edgar Cayce. So her son, Ernest, would have been very familiar with the Cayce readings. And of course, one of the readings that she got was for Ernest. And it's very interesting, too, indicating that Ernest had a past life in Egypt. And whether or not you believe in reincarnation, it's enough to make us understand what Ernest was doing there in Bimini and eventually Cuba. Later, Ernest's brother, Les Hemingway, would become the president and founder of New Atlantis by finding a lot out there in the Atlantic Ocean, purchasing it and expecting that land was going to rise. Now, I've pointed out before that one of the key predictions that the mystery schools have given us for this period of time is land rising. So no matter what we hear, because as land goes down and as sea levels rise, which we hear all about the rise all the time, but they never tell you about this other bit, which is land rising. And land rising is a crucial concept for us to wrap our heads around. And the mystery schools have it over and over again, and particularly land rising off the east coast of America. When that land rises, in fact, it becomes an independent country because it's rising in independent international waters. So in the 60s and 70s, there's a very interesting flood of people that are involved in this. Celebrities like John Lennon, for example, were involved in it. And you hear a lot about Atlantis in this period. And the book Edgar Cayce on Atlantis comes out in the late 60s, 25 years after Cayce had died. So there's a big delay. There's a delayed reaction to Cayce's work when he did it, and then when it becomes popular. So in 1968, there's a book that becomes a bestseller called The Sleeping Prophet by Jess Stern. That's the book that puts Cayce on the map. There's an earlier biography from the 40s, and there's some relative recognition from that. But really, when Cayce becomes the Sleeping Prophet and people understand who he is, comes about as a result of Jess Stern's book. Now, one of the interesting things I want to mention is today is Edgar Cayce's birthday, interestingly enough. Mm-hmm. And so he was born in 1877. Let's see if we can do the math.
You're good at math.
All right, so we have 123, 100 plus 22, 145 years ago, Cayce was born. And very interesting because a lot of psychics are in the Pisces sign. Pisces are Aries. And but it's interesting with Cayce because this Jess Stern was actually kind of a skeptical New York Times journalist who'd been sent to go to the ARE to find out about this psychic stuff. And when he's going through these different readings about, who's going to bring the Cayce work out and everything else, he finds his own name in there that Cayce had laid out in 1943. And here he is in the mid-60s looking at this and being like, what? Stern? Stern is going to bring this out? And he's just Stern. And so he does. And so this whole thing about Atlantis really gets revved up, and we start to see books about the mysteries of Atlantis, Charles Berlitz, the Bermuda Triangle. The whole thing takes off, becomes a cottage industry, but that awareness is rising, that there's something back there. Well, if you think about it, from the mystery school perspective, Atlantis had been a key component of all that information that Theosophy had brought forward and Anthroposophy had brought forward. So, Theosophy comes about when? 1875. Who was it who put Theosophy together? That's Helena Blavatsky from Russia, Emma Britton from the UK, who was a child mystic who was recruited into the Orphic Circle. And remember, she had all kinds of interesting characters like Charles Dickens and Benjamin Disraeli, who became a future prime minister in Britain. She had memories of them, and they had been channeling all kinds of things through her, trying to get information relating to everything from the nature of reality to state secrets. So this thread of people in these positions, there are secret clubs that studied these things, and it sort of kept it, in its own track, basically. And there would be certain periods of time when the mystery schools would let out certain types of information, and all of a sudden, we'd have this kind of intense push for spiritualism, like around Abraham Lincoln's time. And Emma Britton was a big spokesperson for the Lincoln presidency. But he was trying to contact his son. His wife was trying to contact their dead son. And so there was a whole kind of spiritualism craze, and the mediums and the table rapping and the Fox sisters. And this whole period is there. And what that does is it brings out this period of kind of questioning things. And in the middle of that, a book called Atlantis, the Antediluvian World comes out by Ignatius Donnelly. And Donnelly is an interesting figure because he has his own psychic connections, but he's a congressman there in Minnesota and a candidate for vice president. So we have some interesting characters involved, but that book becomes such a complete push overview for the fact that there was an ancient advanced culture, and it takes the Plato legend seriously. In that same period of time, Blavatsky comes out, and the mystery schools decide, in the middle of their big pushback about what they should release and what they shouldn't, that she's a good compromise figure because she's a natural medium of which the world hadn't seen in years, her ability to enter into the spiritual world and then come back and give us those types of visions. So she was a true visionary, and they came up against incredible pushback with Blavatsky, in part, her personality was also very difficult to manage, but she was a woman, she was Russian, and she was in America, and she was pushing those mystery schools saying, I know all the same stuff you do, let's get together, even though you don't admit women in some cases, I'm your girl. And they didn't want to. They didn't want to share those types of things with her, and they viewed her as a major threat. So there's a lot of disinformation that comes out about Blavatsky and everything else in that period. But nonetheless, she's able to get two very important books out, Isis Unveiled, and then The Secret Doctrine, which reveals all of the reincarnation pieces, the deeper psychic pieces, the Atlantean part. These are remarkable books for the period. I can't stress that later you can find books that are like this, but in the period, there's nothing. If you look at when Isis Unveiled came out in 1877, there's nothing like it. And things would spin off of that eventually. The Rudolf Steiner movement would come out of Theosophy, because Theosophy, after Blavatsky dies, goes through a very troubling period. And they try to put Krishnamurti in as the world teacher, and he's a young Hindu. And he's like, what are they doing? And it's basically a too simple a spirituality. They're trying to push through this agenda and just demand that, this kind of Christ figure come through this Hindu boy. And Steiner totally goes in a different direction and says that whole movement's being manipulated, but he came out of it. And he is a theosophical teacher for over a decade by the time he forms Anthroposophy. So when we get into spiritual science and Anthroposophy now, we've had very important core books about Atlantis that have come forward. And those books have come out of the Theosophical movement, have come out of Anthroposophy, including Atlantis and Lemuria. And there's a whole now range of literature dealing with the topic and helping us to understand that there was a culture that existed previously, and that the culture was extremely advanced, and that the people who inhabited the culture were very, very unusual, and that they had advanced psychic powers, and they had all kinds of powers of transmutation, creating things with their mind and directing things with their mind. So a different type of being, in fact, lived there in Atlantis. And then we have the original story of Plato's Atlantis, which comes up in interesting circles tonight. Not only does Jeffrey Epstein play a part, how about Alexander McQueen, the famous fashion designer?
One of my favorites.
You love McQueen.
I do.
And he, in fact, when he came forward, and I guess this is one of the TKOs for tonight, but when he came forward with his very interesting Plato Atlantis line, how about that? Collection. It's a sad thing, his suicide and hanging himself, and the, all of the things around it. And
so it was his final collection.
It was his final collection. And, it is interesting. It's astounding almost to think about this person stepping forward in 2010, releasing this, talking all about Atlantis, and putting together this kind of futuristic collection. And people who plug into the Atlantis piece know that there's a future past aspect to it. And that group that's operating in political circles, the group that operated around Epstein and all the scientists that he was recruiting as a part of this, all have that key understanding about Atlantis and the future past aspect of it. That's what we're going to get into tonight. But McQueen in particular is an interesting character, because right in the middle of those fashion circles are people connected directly with Ghislaine Maxwell. And one of them is a relative of Egerton Sykes, who was a British intelligence agent who brought forward the most incredible collection of Atlantis research with language experts, with scientific experts. And it's a relative of his who hooks up with Maxwell, and she's a real bigwig in the fashion industry. So that all plays in dramatically tonight, and we're going to get into some interesting territory. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist 4th anniversary show. This is X Series 122, Autec in the HotZone, Ghislaine Maxwell, and the Secret Search for Atlantis. We're going to be taking your questions in the second half of the program. You can ask those now, and Miss Olivia will be picking them up. And I also want to mention that we're going to be doing part 2 of the 4th anniversary surprise, and we're going to do that tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. So you have us 2 nights in a row. How are you doing out there?
Good. VKK wants everyone to know that Manly P. Hall was also born on March 18th. So
I was not aware of that.
Mm-hmm.
I was not aware of that. Well, Manly P was very unusual as well. Ready-made mystery school advocate, just secret teachings of the aging.
He's an initiate of some kind.
There's no question. There's no question. And had very high regard for Helena Blavatsky and Rudolf Steiner as well. So he was very aware of their incredible contribution. And one of the things I want to say in relation to these ideas as we put them forward, that Theosophy and Anthroposophy, spiritual science of Rudolf Steiner, play such an important role in the things that are happening, and give us that foundation to set up a new world in that sense, which is, for example, in the heart of Anthroposophy is biodynamic farming, a whole new way of, feeding thousands that you couldn't do before. And it's very innovative, and it's very in touch with nature's rhythms, and it's got a whole spiritual foundation to it. Eurythmy, which is a whole movement, about sacred movements and sacred theater and things of this nature. So, there's so much that comes out of what the mystery schools have left behind. Theosophy brought forward things like cremation here, the first North American cremation. Meditation, you see people walking around with yoga mats all the time. Most of that comes directly out of these movements. I mean, that's what we're getting to. So that influence really kind of comes over here, along with meditation and reincarnation and things of that nature. So it's some combination of that kind of, Western culture being at the pivot point of history, and then having been informed by that deeper Eastern and Western mystery school tradition. That's the combination that's been going on behind the scenes. And we've reached a crucial pass with all of this information. And so we're going to need all the wisdom of the mystery schools in order to get us through. All right. So we've got some foundation of where Atlantis was coming from. There's a very cryptic reference in the work of Rudolf Steiner, who was the Austrian mystic who set up spiritual science. And as I mentioned, as the founder of Anthroposophy, came directly out of Theosophy, and was a remarkable mystic in his own right, but also an incredibly accomplished genius. And, he's a real scholar. So in a way, his input's a little different than Blavatsky, who's so psychic, but kind of erratic in a sense. So the information is at you, but it's all over the place. And Steiner had the ability to grasp something and enter into the idea. And that's, I think, a lot of what we want to do tonight with some of these things is we're going to try to enter into these situations and kind of mentally learn something by being in the field of it and not worrying about, especially with some of the characters we're talking about, they're so notorious for other reasons. What I want to do with figures like Maxwell and Epstein is get us to look at them in terms of the Atlantis cult and the Belial cult that they were pushing to find and learn. And that has a great deal to do with eugenics and that idea that they could be a super race. And, the communication with this ancient technology and with this ancient culture, giving them a position of being able to become supermen. This is a very important thing that goes beyond just the whole kind of pedo island thing, which I think has been covered quite well on the alternative side. It's still very spotty in the mainstream media. They've rolled it into a kind of a Me Too burrito, but it's much deeper than that. And that sexual blackmail deep state train is very important to follow up on. But what I'm looking for tonight is, where are they coming from on Atlantis? Why are they interested in Atlantis? Why an ancient culture? Why a super culture? Why the super Aryan piece? And when we get into them and we kind of inhabit their ideas along this line. We're going to see through them to the things that they were trying to get at. And around them is all of the kind of notorious qualities that they had, and the whole setup of Pedo Island and the terrible things that happened there and all the cases around it. But I want us to look at them to start to get a handle on what were they after. And somebody like Maxwell, what is she doing at this point, having been the recipient and the person who was really pushing for so many of these things, especially with her company TerraMar, which we're going to get into tonight. But I think that Steiner, one of the things that he was really good at was envisioning that there was going to come a period in the 21st century where we were going to be overwhelmed by the technology. And so when you read some of the Steiner material and we're going back and looking at it, you can see that he's looking out there over this period and he's just reading it. It's kind of like he's reading the headlines that are going on now 100 years ago. I mean, it's that scary in a sense. Also talking about the internet and in a really remarkable way, and incorporating all that into this figure that emerges as Ahriman, which is the evil coming through the technology. And I say this as somebody who's a real advocate for technology and very comfortable with the advances around technology. I ran a tech magazine for 10 years, so I know something about it. And but what I want to stress is that the danger that happens, and I've talked to so many people about this, that when things happen like the financial coup d'etat of 2008 or the COVID op and all these different things, and you hear people blow it off and say, well, rich people have always tried to exploit everyone else and all this other stuff. It's true, but it's very different now. This isn't like the Roman times or something. These people have access to remarkable technology. On the surface, we know about the remarkable technology. But now they have access to, the access to this X technology. The X technology is something that the public doesn't understand. If they've been following the show, they get some kind of a handle on it. We have some kind of a handle on it only because we have the ability to take something like the UFO file and take something like the mystery school activity and start to thread together how those things coalesce, and how some of the major figures have brought that information together. Just like over the summer, we were doing things about the Cosmos Club, which is really like the earliest kind of UFO Bilderberg group that would put these very high-end scientists together to talk about things outside of the normal realm of lectures and things where everybody could hear. These people needed a place to get together and share this information that they were uncovering about the UFO file. But that information about the UFO file corresponds with what? The older aspects that were there. The Nikola Tesla information that got brought forward. Remember, that's X technology too. And so when you think of it like that, the Atlantean technology that Edgar Cayce gets us into, that's very deep X technology. And he's saying, well, they operated this stuff 50,000 BC. So we have to change if we're going to get a handle on this stuff, we're going to have to change the way we view history in a dramatic fashion. One of the things I was mentioning, this obscure reference that Steiner made, was he said after Theosophy, the Western mystery initiators decided they were going to use a different track. I believe the different track that they decided to use, besides anthroposophy, was the Edgar Cayce work. And I think that the strange mystery school aspects around the Cayce work are dramatic. And so that other piece that they decided we're going to work through Cayce through a series of decades, and then his work is going to be compiled and let out to the public. That's pretty much the situation that gave us so many of these answers. But one of the crucial things in that information is this idea of land rising and Atlantis rising and how that affects this period in time. So that's what we need to get into if we're going to understand where these people were coming from, the Maxwells and the Epsteins. They weren't just coming from a place of let's be the biggest, sleazeball on the blog. And, they had some kind of a driving ideology, and it directly referenced Atlantis, and that's what hasn't been brought out. And I think if we don't understand that, we don't get to the bottom of any of this. So that's what we're going to do tonight. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is X Series 122, and we're going with Autec in the HotZone. I'm going to talk about Autec here in a minute because it's a big piece of this. But before I do,
Vincognito wants to know, perhaps the X technology is less about alien races and more about the remnants of the ancient civilization. Yes. If they were that high tech, many of them could have escaped in the space vehicles.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Or had the ability to manipulate dimension. There's a lot of different possibilities, especially when you're dealing with the Atlanteans, who are incredibly spiritual race. One half of them were. And as we got into in the episode we did about Edgar Cayce and the things, these strange concoctions of the Atlantean scientists who had cloven hoofs in some ways. They were a cross of different types of genetic strands in order to create these beings, and they did all kinds of different beings. One of the things, I'm going to jump into McQueen early, actually. One of the things that I thought was dramatic about Alexander McQueen's collection dealing with Plato's Atlantis, as he called it, the 2010 collection, remember he dies in February of 2010 of they found him hanged, but the police refused to call it a suicide. So how do you rank that? And I'm going to read from that report. But before he dies, he leaves us this incredible Atlantis collection. Are you ready? Models wore facial prosthetics that spoke to future evolutions in the human form. Layered paillettes, is that the word? Layered paillettes evoked scales or shells. And there is part of what they were doing with this extraordinary kind of transhumanist past-future piece, which I think is quite significant. And I don't think that McQueen was doing it in a lighthearted fashion. Honestly, I wonder if it wasn't connected with his death in some way, since the collection comes out in November and he's dead by February. Of course, it could be just as they said it was. You never know. Here's what grabbed me. In the collection, of course, in the Cayce work, he talks about the strange collection of attributes that these things had. And some of them are just like super androids and they're soulless. Others have kind of a animal piece. And so some of them had feathers, some of them had, they had that chimera feel to them. So the shoes that he introduces here, and this is an interesting shoe, Miss Olivia.
I mean, can you imagine trying to, I don't know how the models walked in those.
I mean, that's a hoof, right? And what it says here, shoes took anthropomorphic forms like these hoof-like platforms. The skeletal shoes evokes the bone structure of DC vertebrates. I mean, it's unmistakable that he was communicating something which is very interesting and quite remarkable. And I think McQueen was part of this track. I think he was dialed in to the Atlantean search and that he had this access to this information. And I think that whatever he was plugged into or whatever level it was on, it was enough to influence him to do this. 10 years ago, it says Alexander McQueen's Plato's Atlantis show imagined fashion's future. There's that future past thing again, because if it was ordinarily Atlantis, it would be, it's just the past. But no, it's in the future somehow. How does that work? Well, there's an interesting piece, and this is brought out in mystery school literature about Atlantis and the whole resurging of Atlantis and how the exact same thing that Atlantis faced was going to come around again, and we were going to be full bore into the Atlantean experience. Now, remember, Atlantis on one side created this incredible Amelia's group who were using this incredible technology to interface with what? The saintly realms. This is what we've learned through the Cayce readings, and I'll read some of those tonight. But on the other side, the Belial group was using the two-eye stone for the same types of things we see going on in the world now, dominating wars. and things of this nature. So you have that ability on the Amelia side for those priestesses to be trained, as Casey says. They go through a training, purification, and they're able to interact with the saintly realm through this two-eye stone. And that's Tuaoi. It becomes very important, I think. Someone mentioned Lady Gaga out there. In fact, she was involved directly with this, and they used her song in that period. It was one of the first live streams of any modeling show anywhere in 2010. So I think that there is a crisscross. There is a little more on that. And we find that very interesting. I'm going to read a little bit from this when it first came out. The show took its name from the Greek philosopher who also wrote about the legendary island that was sunk into the ocean by earthquakes and fire. The mythic technological advancements of this utopian location have featured in many stories since, with Aquaman being one of the latest in a long list. You notice you're hearing about Atlantis a lot, really a lot right now. As a matter of fact, somebody sent me a list of the things that we had covered in the past 3 months, and then the Joe Rogan Experience, what they would cover like 2 or 3 weeks later. And this was a remarkable list because they would do Atlantis like 2 weeks. They did one of the Atlantis shows right the same night that we did. And what I want to do, I want to kind of emphasize that so much of this is about showing what's in the zeitgeist. I mean, of course, you know, these marketing people and all that, they come into the alternative media. And whenever I see, you know, these big fights over, oh, you know, Joe Rogan was trying to get the word out and all this stuff, and Tucker Carlson and all this stuff's fine, and also it's good. But nonetheless, you know, when you get $200 million, you're in a compromised system. It's the nature of the ball game. You're never going to be able to get your real full 100 full bore message out. It's always going to be diluted to some degree. And I think in Rogan's case, when he came out with some of those videos that made him look like he was being taken hostage or something, I mean, he was finding out the hard way. When you accept $200 million, you are in a system. And that's tough. And I think that anyone who's doing their work should get paid to the hilt. It doesn't bother me at all. But my point is, you're going to encounter things that won't allow you to speak as you would ordinarily speak. So what those people need, the breath of fresh air, the Wild West zone for those people are, you know, what we do here in the Ideas Room, the Dark Journalist show and the X series. We're able to explore the ideas and go in, and we don't have those types of handicaps. No one's paid us $200 million not to say something. And it's a crucial thing to keep in mind, and this happens with Tucker Carlson as well. Those things are good for the mass population, but don't think that they're anywhere near the potency of the things that come directly through, you know, this kind of a work, or the work of Gigi Young or Catherine Fitz or something. That's potent work. It's like the real core sort of powerful utilization inside. And these other things are going to be kind of larger reflections where, you know, something like Fox News TV says, oh, you know, there's a lot of stuff going on around like UFOs in the deep state. We need somebody to fill the gap for us to grab some of that market share. It's not an organic formation. I still think it's helpful when those shows come out. So like a show like Rogan or a show like Tucker Carlson, they're good, but it's, you know, they're still working for the man is what I'm trying to get across. And it's very crucial distinction to make. That stuff has almost nothing to do with getting at the core of some of these things, although I appreciate that it's out there in the mass circulation. So when we get around to something like what happened with McQueen, I think when we're really kind of digesting what happened there, where was he coming from with the futuristic Atlantis? Where was this whole piece coming from? And what they have to say here is that McQueen's design looked like they could be worn by Amber Heard or Nicole Kidman, both on the red carpet and under the sea. In McQueen's visual exploration of what the world would look like after man ravaged the planet for resources, Atlantis provides a potential haven after the ice caps have melted. What lies beneath the sea is humanity's last hope. It is an apocalyptic vision that results in beautiful new creatures. Do you see where they're going with this? marrying land, sea, and even figures who look like they have come from outer space. It's true. The whole thing looks entirely alien. And one of the first sort of reviews that was major about this was completely about how they look like a bunch of aliens. And they do. I mean, there's some kind of a rabbit-eared alien haircut going on there. All right. A couple of more interesting things along this line. Alexander McQueen's Plato's Atlantis praying mantis empire gown. We all know that the mantis is a big alien figure. It's supposed to be this ancient alien group that is observing the planet and using their wisdom to stop us from destroying ourselves and stuff. So that's part of McQueen's collection, which I think again shows this insight. Now you might say, where is McQueen getting that interest in insight? Especially on the level where he's incorporating the chimerical aspect. That's pure Casey on this. Plato didn't talk about half men being involved in Atlantis and Atlantean scientists with DNA experiments. That is a Casey mystery school spin. So McQueen, or whoever is giving them that information and inspiration, is getting that from that end of the spectrum. And I think it does, it holds a powerful or quite a remarkable visual impact. And just to be fair on the death part, and it's sad when somebody with that much talent is dead under any circumstances, but the death itself is suspicious. And one of the things they say is that McQueen left a note saying, "Look after my dogs, sorry." And then on behalf of Lee McQueen's family, Alexander McQueen today announces the tragic news that Lee McQueen, the founder and designer of the Alexander McQueen brand, has been found dead in his home. And what happens is that the police refuse, after saying it was due to a hanging, they refused to say the death was a suicide. So the Metropolitan Police stated that the note was not suspicious, but did not confirm that the death was a suicide. So it's an unusual set of circumstances around McQueen, and it is very close to when he put this collection out. So, under any circumstances, it's a tragedy, as I say, but what was it that was going on with this? I mean, was he revealing too much? And had he got himself into a situation where, by incorporating this, it was too much too soon? Or maybe, he was just depressed and that's the way that it went, but it's unusual. So the headline here, it says, "The surprise alien and predator influence in Alexander McQueen's final runway show." I've pointed out groups like X-Protect, which guard information that has to do with the UFO file, and they've guarded it by usually discrediting the figures involved, or they could also employ different types of means, destroy their work situation, destroy their family relationships. And I've gone through a number of cases like that, and it's remarkable how consistent the pattern is. And then there's one strand of X-Protect that operates on a lethal basis. That is, if someone's very close to giving out a UFO secret, and if it's something that directly leans into this X technology on the what I call the Apotheum side. And Apotheum is something I've explained over the course of time here. The word is Apotheum, and it is a word that we've brought forward. It's not a word you find in the dictionary, interestingly enough. Let's just say that it incorporates a kind of physics that is a reality disruption physics. So the things that we understand, up is down, gravity, the laws of gravity, and the universal laws of interaction, those universal laws cease to work when Apotheum is active and activated. And the UFO phenomena activates all of these unusual Apotheum effects. People walk through walls. I've talked with a number of abductees, and they said, well, I was abducted through the wall. How does that work? What kind of technology is that? We also know that things tend not to operate. For example, engines stop operating. People's sense of time disappears. Oh, I thought I was there for, a half hour, and I come back and it's 2 days later or something. these types of unusual time slips and just a whole different reality function. That is Apotheum, pure and simple. So when the UFOs show up and this happens, the national security state not only wants that advantage of understanding what's going on there, but they're also afraid of it because that Apotheum effect is anybody's guess what's going on there. The reality distortion that takes place and the different types of effects. For example, it's well known for people who study the phenomena of UFOs that Stanton Friedman used to point this out to me quite a bit, that when a UFO lands somewhere, nothing will grow in that field. That's it. Wherever it landed, nothing grows around it. So there's an Apotheum field that it's not friendly to natural things. And it's interesting. These are the things that are so important around the UFO file to discuss, in my opinion, so that when you see, fights over Lou Elizondo or some dumb CIA thing like that, don't waste any energy on it. It's all, the things that the government would give you on this wouldn't be the truth. Look how they've behaved during the COVID op. I mean, look at how they've behaved politically with the Ukraine situation. This is not a group, they're still holding records from the Kennedy assassination. That was 60 years ago. You think they're going to give you the facts on UFOs? No, they're going to give you a spin and allow you to talk about it because they want to build a UFO threat in, and that's something that I think is important. But when you get past that, remember how fascinating and interesting the UFO field is and those experiences and the different types of, we have decades and decades of research around this. And part of it has to do with the incredible disruptive effects that they have when they show up. I know there are opposite cases that, people claim that they've had incredible healings from interacting with those things. I don't know, but one thing is for sure, that level of reality disruption and the idea of cities, getting blacked out and things of this nature is a very crucial piece. And that's what Apotheum is. And so the groups that guard, the X-Protect groups on the aerospace side that guard against that secret getting out about the UFO file, will employ all different types of means, financial, political, and lethal means to keep that secret. So that's what's crucial. When you look into the history of people like James McDonald, who try to bring this out on the UFO side, he was bumped off. Morris Jessup in the late 50s, he'd put together the Philadelphia experiment, HotZone's technology side with the UFO thing. Forget it. He's a really threatening personality. And he was working with J. Manson Valentine, who 10 years later discovers the Bimini Wall. And you start to connect those dots and you see how these groups operate. So when you get around the UFO piece and then you move that now and you move it into the secret around Atlantis and Atlantis disclosure and things of this nature, you find the same types of groups operating because what are they doing? They're protecting that Apotheum secret. And the idea is when you look at the two-eye crystal or something like that, they don't know how it operates. And groups that got fascinated by what the Atlanteans were using, who were associated with Epstein and his big push around all these scientists studying something underwater, and Ghislaine and her submarine trips and taking the most incredible scientists, and Stephen Hawking is one, we're going to talk about him tonight. They're going under there in the hot zone because they're observing ruins and they're observing some kind of effect that's taking place down there. And you're going to find groups like Autec are protecting that Apotheum secret, just like the X-Protect people. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is our 4th anniversary of the X series. It's episode 122, and we're going to be taking your questions in the second half of the program. We're also doing a part 2 on this episode, covering the mystery schools tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. So remember to join us then. How are you doing out there?
Great. Debbie McAdoo wants to know, is Apotheum a distortion of the 3D dimension like wormhole collapse or a rip in timeline?
Well, it's really interesting you mentioned that. I had printed out a reading of Casey's. I think he tries to give us an impression of Apotheum in a sense. And in a reading dealing with these priestesses using the two-eye stone in Atlantis, he says, there are few terms in the present that would indicate the state of consciousness, save that through the concentration of the group mind of the children of the law of one, the Emilius group, they entered into a fourth dimensional consciousness or were absent from the body. Thus, they were able to have the experience of crystallizing through the light the speech from what might well be termed the saint realm to impart understanding and knowledge to the group thus gathered. So the two-eye stone has the ability to put you into a totally different reality and to plug you in to different realms. So when a group like the Belial group takes that from the Emilius group, then they're able to use it exactly the same way, but for opposite negative purposes. So that's what Apotheum is. It's a complete reality transformation. So you have a 3D physical reality here, and he's saying they're entering into a fourth dimensional consciousness, the priestesses on this. That gives, I think, somewhere in there is how we start to understand what Apotheum is. It's a different state of reality. And that's how, in that state, we can communicate with, if we've been attuned in such a way, we can communicate with those forces in the outer spheres, right? The saint realm and the higher spiritual encounters. And they had a tradition of this with the Ark of the Covenant. If you go back into the Bible and some of these things in the Urim and Thummim, that whole placing the stones on and getting the messages, that's the same type of thing used for a good high purpose. There's an opposite thing, just like, when we hear those stories about the Ark of the Covenant. I remember talking when I was interviewing Graham Hancock, and he was here. He was telling me about his travels over there to find the Ark of the Covenant and how one of these priests who had handled the Ark of the Covenant, they obviously had kept it in Ethiopia for a number of years, that dealing with it made him blind. So it's very powerful technology that exists. And it operates on a completely different principle than the way we understand this kind of, nuclear fusion world of today. It's something completely different. One of the interesting things about how they're talking about exchanging, nuclear exchange, and they had this, warning from the American administration, if Putin drops a nuke, remember to wear a mask and have social distancing. This is the kind of like Stepford Biden level of dealing with things. But what's interesting about them talking about nuclear weapons is, if you go back to the late 80s, and this is something that Dr. Farrell points out, there are press conferences about the zero option with President Reagan and Gorbachev. They're talking about eliminating every single nuclear weapon. Now, how do you do that unless you have a totally different system to replace it, something else that's more advanced that you just don't talk about? So the fact that they could get together and say, we're going to eliminate zero option nuclear weapons, 1987, okay? So here we are, and it's 35 years later. You're still talking about nuclear exchanges? I mean, there's something else. There's different types of operational technology. They're making us live in the past, just like with the BLM stuff. They were making us live during the civil rights thing. It's not a reality. So many of those problems have been dealt with. There's so much integration in society. It's not perfect, and you can always do better. But they were trying to put things on a level where it was like, pre-1963. I mean, they're trying to make us deal at a very core level, like a very primitive level. What would you call it? A second chakra level? Something like that. First chakra?
First chakra.
First chakra. And the more they can throw us into that state with the Ukraine idea, and rolling out this actor to be like, oh, the president, heroically taking on this thing, when the CIA initiated the entire situation by creating a threat on Russia's doorstep, and then Russia rolling in and not doing themselves or the world any favors by doing that. But let's be honest about it. By the same token that we didn't accept missiles in Cuba, and President Kennedy was able to remove them without any war, shows you what a genius he was, and what remarkable instincts he had for saving the world, which he did. Even though the CIA would eliminate him a year later, he saved the world. So we have to kind of keep these things in mind as we go forward here. What you got there?
Sorry, there were porn bots I had to kill.
Aha, the stream under attack.
Mhm.
That's all right. We're gonna muscle through in any case. It's great to see so many of you in the ideas room. It is important to get into how we've done this for 4 years, because I really have enjoyed sharing these ideas with everyone. I've got incredible feedback. I learned in reviewing this that the X series has gotten 25 million views in that period of time. And I know there's all kinds of videos that get more views than that, but dealing with these ideas and being able to reach across to so many people with them is incredibly, it's a remarkable experience. And so I think that we're moving somewhere with the information, and I think it really, it sets us up in 2022 to grab the inspiration of the mystery schools that they laid out for us now over 100 years ago, and to really lock into that message and figure out what's the nature of the reality and the situation that we're actually in right now, and not taking on some weird narratives about like, oh, the heroes in Ukraine, or, all that weird 1984 stuff really looks old, doesn't it? It looks old. And they're trying to play a kind of a Desert Storm type thing with this. And it's an incredibly dangerous situation they've led us into. And what I'm hoping is that over the course of the next year of doing the X series, we're able to open these esoteric truths and see how that adds up with the deep state activities in the world, and make a change for the better with the types of things that we're moving forward with here. So it takes all of you to do that with us. And so thank you so much for being here with us. Yeah, what you got?
Chris Beatty wanted to know, what about the Skinwalker Ranch? Is that Apotheum?
Yeah, well, there are places that are like dimensional doorways like that. And I think that the original Skinwalker experience is kind of like Amityville in that sense. But I have to say that a lot of the things that have taken place after the fact seem to me like people like Corbell, exploiting the situation. Then it's sort of like the CIA's playground after the original things happens, and they go in there and insert a bunch of things. And, you have these filmmakers that make millions of dollars around this stuff. And it's not the core of the situation, I think of very important true cases. I even think of the Betty and Barney Hill case, Betty Andreasen, her remarkable case. She just passed away, and her UFO encounters were remarkable. And those stories, I think, are key and crucial. The work of John Mack. We have some really outstanding examples of situations. So what we always have to be watching is to oust that CIA narrative that goes in there, or the marketing thing that comes in, and really just keep with that true original story. And I think what you're going to see, especially with all this stuff now that TTSA, they're trying to come back, they've been proven out for all the CIA influence and the lies that they've put into this subject. One of the important things that you're going to see happen is that UFO file information splitting in terms of research. There's going to be UFO file research which goes on that track. The really core things about genuine sightings, genuine abduction experiences, and you're going to see the CIA track, which is going to be all manipulated, weird stuff. CIA agents who pretend to be abductees, who will say, like, I had this experience and now I'm interacting with the alien, and the CIA is going to control the voice of the alien. And around the corner from here, of course, we're in lovely Harvard Square, is Avi Loeb's, literally like 5 minutes behind me, is Avi Loeb's astrophysics lab. And that's where they set up the Galileo Project. And the Galileo Project is an incredible exercise in CIA manipulation of the topic. And the idea there is a slightly different approach. They're going to say something, what they're saying is that Oumuamua is this spaceship that came from another galaxy, and it's here, and it's AI, so we get our AI up to snuff, and then we'll get these messages back and forth, and it'll say, save the environment, tax everybody, carbon tax. And so that's how they're working it. So the CIA has the UFO threat thing up their sleeve, which is why they're even talking about it, or allowing the media to talk about it. Those are the types of narratives that we can really enlighten people on. And between us, I think we can really get to the core, real traditional research, and you find incredible people out there like, there's so many that are doing it on the important track. Gigi Young, I've pointed her work, Farrell's work. And there's a lot of really good UFO stuff that goes under the radar that has nothing to do with what's become this kind of junkified stratification of the UFO field through CIA, just garbage narratives. The thing is, what's important to remember is that the CIA is always injecting, narratives to feed their control interests. And so if they can get a whole military program to defend against aliens and get thousands of dollars and corridors to make deals and to pay off aerospace companies and to pretend that there's a UFO threat, then that's what they'll do. Now, they'll even let out the fact that there are UFOs. They're willing to say now, there's aliens, but now we're going to control that piece. And I think the human origin story comes into that too. So we need to kind of keep that in mind. And I think that we need to split. It's happening anyway. The UFO field is really the UFO file research is one track, and that goes with the real pure cases, the Mac work, the incredible background that was given, really, some of the astronauts like Edgar Mitchell and all those types of things. And then this other track, which is all marketing and, all kinds of billions of dollars, like $50 million dumped on the debt sheet of TTSA for History Channel shows. That's not the real thing. It's like a weird mirror aspect that's manipulated. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show. Well, we've exposed some of those CIA UFO threat types over the course of the 4 years on this program. And we're going to be taking your questions in the second half. And I'm going to try to get through some of this really powerful information about Autec and Maxwell. I have to take a little pause here to point out a couple of interesting things that tie in directly with what we've been seeing. I want to mention something here that we've brought forward too about censorship, and that Twitter censored this story about Hunter Biden's laptop in the crucial month of October before the election. And everybody said 50 different national security officials who were all CIA people and DIA people went on record and said it's Russian disinformation. Okay, now here we are, March 2022. The New York Times has admitted Hunter Biden laptop and the information on it was authentic, meaning all the sketchy deals that he did with Ukrainian officials and Burisma, and the weird, kind of porno stuff of himself and crack and offering his dad's access that make him and the Biden family completely blackmailable. All that's been proven true. And the New York Post, who originally got censored by Twitter, they actually locked the account of the oldest newspaper in America. That shows you the dirty level that the tech operators are on, that they stopped this story coming forward because they thought it would damage their candidate. And what did they do during that process? They shut off the Twitter account of a sitting president of the United States, who, by the way, has access to the nuclear arsenal and all the rest of that, and you would think, needs communication with the outside world. So we have to understand the kind of sickness around the tech companies on Twitter and Facebook, and we have to really see that their censorship world is a violation of the Constitution, and it should be pushed back against heavily, and it has no place in a democratic republic at all. So all those people who back then thought, well, all these 50 CIA people came out and said that was a BS story, it turns out a year and a half later they let out, no, it was real. The whole thing was real, but we didn't want to tell you because it would have spun the election in the wrong direction. So people at the time who were anti-Trump and were pro, whatever, anything that was against Trump, they were like, good, we're glad the CIA is saying this, Now how do you feel? Because the CIA has lied you into a really weird situation. And, should the CIA be picking who the president is, even if it's your choice? It's not their position. They're an extra constitutional agency. They're not supposed to have the kind of power that they do. These guys have their own Air Force, The Department of Homeland Security has 250,000 employees. Think about that. They didn't even exist until the September 11th attacks. And the real story around the September 11th attacks still isn't in. So you can see we're in a weird, they're setting up bureaucracies around operations that they've invented. So one of the very kind of crucial pieces of things that we've covered in this program is the continuity of government program and the emergency powers exploitation. This is important because we're going to cover that more and more as time goes on, because what they've done, and they did it with the COVID op, and we see Justin Trudeau using it. He pressed the button on emergency powers. I'm a dictator. You can't challenge me. And I have emergency powers. I can call martial law. I can do whatever I want because there's an emergency. Well, what are the things? Where is the independent vetting of that emergency? The next one could be in relation. They could say, oh, there's a Russian cyber jam. There's a cyber hack going on. It's an emergency. We take all your rules over. The Constitution doesn't work. And here's what we'll do. We'll set up a new internet. Everyone can join that new internet, and only the good people can be on it. So if you have differing opinions with the current administration, forget it, you're out. So these are the types of things that could happen. We're on the precipice of those types of things going down, and we need that incredible pushback of people being aware of it and saying, absolutely no way, And so that's a crucial piece that you're going to be seeing us covering in this 5th year going forward. Yes, Miss Olivia.
Grant Alexander is in the audience, and he wants to know, DJ, why don't the mystery schools work together for the betterment of humanity and our world?
No, of course they do. Of course.
How do they?
Oh, how do they?
How do they?
Didn't he say why?
Well, yes, but
okay.
So now explain how they do it.
All right. Well, first things first. Yes, they do. In terms of how they do it, well, when you study them, you can see that all the way back to like Pythagoras and stuff. It's about keeping information that's transmitted. Gurdjieff used to speak about it this way, and Gurdjieff came out of the Sarmoon Brotherhood. Gurdjieff said there's two things. There's what to do and how to do it. So the what to do is put out there through religions and philosophical systems, turn the other cheek, for example. And the how to do it stays hidden, because when the how to do it is out there, it gets persecuted, driven underground, and exploited. So the mystery schools are the how to do it. They maintain the rules and principles and the traditions for the things so that they don't get caught up in this kind of mechanical cycle, and in our current state, we go into these things like wars, and it's like every other year there's a different war that's happening. We can remember the Iraq War. The CIA lied us into the Iraq War. How did they do it? They said there were WMD and Saddam didn't have them, right? So we went in there anyway, which was a massive blunder for the United States. So here we are with another war, which, in this case, yes, somebody else is attacking a different country. And they're trying to, this administration is trying to pull us in to that war. And what they need to do first is convince us that the person at the head of Ukraine is this incredible hero. And when you study that background, you can see those puppet strings again. So the mystery school aspects intersects with the political process. Steiner went on the record saying that most of the political situation in 1920, the people were involved in either left-hand or right-hand schools. So that's another important distinction, which is the left-hand mystery schools are groups that have taken the position that they will use this advanced knowledge to exploit humanity. The other group, which we can see their influence through moving the culture forward in different ways, their position is that humanity needs tools to grow, and they need that connection with their spiritual reality, but it's their choice. So they need to lay things out there, lay the seeds out, and then see what happens, and then come back in. So they have a tendency to come in heavy and go out, and lay back and see what happens, and then come in heavy and go out. So the schools certainly have a beneficial impact. I mean, the founding fathers, for example, were all associated with one of the schools. And, you know, what was the fruits of what they did? The idea of freedom of speech, the idea of a free country, the idea of being free and independent, pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. You know, these are mystery school tenets. And so fundamentally, you'll find that. But it is interesting because a lot of the secret societies have the same information as a good mystery school, as we would say, and they use it for totally different purposes. This was the same principle that was active, according to Casey and others, in ancient Atlantis that got us into that situation where the Emilius group was trying to use the same type of technology for a totally different purpose. So it is interesting to track it that way, because we're kind of looking at the inherited reigns of a situation where, you know, we're trying to follow on that Emilius track, and the Belial track is incredibly active, and those two forces continue to battle it out. No question. Excellent question. What else you got?
Fooper Fighter, was Kennedy right about shattering the CIA?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is the interesting thing about Kennedy. When he got into office, he could not believe what the CIA was up to. And,
well,
you know,
what was that specifically that he didn't know until he became president?
That they were literally controlling, without any input from the military or the president, the foreign policy of the United States and the world. So they'd go into a country and say, oh, this guy needs to be overthrown. We're working on ousting him and all this other stuff. And he, you know, Kennedy stopped immediately and said, aren't these guys supposed to ask the president if he wants to do this stuff? What's going on here? And it is that questioning and reasserting over and over again, pulling back those powers under the umbrella of the presidency and the executive branch. Kennedy did that with the space program. And, you know, there's an echo of that in Trump and the Space Force, because, again, the UFO file has gone over into the hands of the Central Intelligence Agency and the Aerospace Wing. So when you look at those forces duking it out, the presidency, the executive branch, got left out around the time of Kennedy in relation to the UFO file. So what's interesting is in 2016, the CIA group that operated TTSA, what would become TTSA, would roll out DeLong and that whole thing. They thought that they were going to be working with Hillary. They thought Hillary was getting in, and they were going to do this whole UFOs are real, and, you know, we need to defend against them and create a whole department. The echo of that is in the National Defense Authorization Act, and it is that ASRO office that Kirsten Gillibrand operates, the senator from New York, and that's a UAP, you know, defense thing. But when you look at that, when Trump gets into office and does the Space Force, which is the first armed services branch since the 40s, you know, this is really different. It's a whole different thing. It says, I'm trying to get the UFO file back under presidential control. And you notice there's been incredible de-emphasis on the Space Force because it's honeycombed with people that Trump set up in there. And so Stepford Biden doesn't have any use for that. This is the nature of the thing. Yeah.
Brenda Fisher says, is not the CIA itself a left-hand path secret society?
Oh, I think they're deeply connected with that, which is why something like the UFO file should never be entrusted to the CIA, you know. And the idea of disclosure from the CIA is absurd. You know, they're the chief liars in the government, and there's no incentive for them to give UFO researchers the truth. I mean, come on. So those UFO researchers who've gone along with that and said, oh, you know, Elizondo's great, or you know, we should work with all of these CIA people like Jim Semivan, 25 years at the top of the CIA directorate. You don't want to work with them on the UFO file. No. Their whole point is to I'll give you a good idea of how the CIA operates. An oil company sets up shop in like Kazakhstan, for example. And what they want is, if there's a revolution in Kazakhstan, they lose all their money because they can't pretend they're oil fields. They can't protect that stuff. So what they need is the CIA to drum up a situation where we send troops into Kazakhstan to protect it against some false, like, oh, they're terrorists there or something like that. So this is the type of games that they play. And their patrons are big oil, big finance. They come out of Sullivan and Cromwell, lawyers. And that's where the CIA was born. And that connection then is New York and international finance. It's not a military objective. So even Truman had great reservations about setting up the CIA in the first place. And he said, hands off. I don't want an American Gestapo. That was his original reaction to it. Eventually, he gets talked into it, or persuaded that this thing can work. So we have to understand the history of that Central Intelligence Agency. They continue to manipulate things on the world stage. And if you don't get a handle on it, you'll find yourself in the middle of World War III, because that's just how they'll operate. And they'll have the media cheering it on, and they'll have people lining up on the Democratic side who used to call things like this out. And they'll be saying, oh, this is great, because Zelensky, we need to go to war for Zelensky. And they're going to convince a lot of liberals who used to think straightly about being anti-war. That's where the anti-war movement came from, were the liberals. What happened to those people? They've all been turned into militarists through MSNBC. That's programming. So how important is it when you learn about mind control through, the work that we're doing here, or the different things where you find it? Because that can really save the world, if we can get out of the entrainment and out of the mind control. And that's something we're trying to do here. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. Those were great questions early. And we are talking here about Autec and the HotZone. That's what we're going to be getting back to. And the Atlantis piece of this picture, the search for Atlantis, and Ghislaine Maxwell. We'll take more of your questions in the second part of the program. And Miss Olivia will have those for you. Okay. So just a little more background on this. Lester Hemingway. Lester Hemingway sets up New Atlantis. Lester Hemingway, the Hemingways connected to Casey. Casey giving the readings on Atlantis, saying Atlantis is rising off Bimini. Crucial piece for us to understand. This is the spot he's pointing to where Atlantis is going to rise on the map. He founds New Atlantis. He writes up all these documents. He sends a letter to LBJ about it. And LBJ writes back saying, we hope to support your efforts to create this new nation, whatever, really unusual stuff. Eventually, the government boots him out and destroys the things. He set up a bunch of these kind of wooden rafts, and these platforms along a particular area. And they get wrecked and ruined. And then the government says, we don't like what you're doing. Get out of there. But Hemingway was deeply involved in this. And then we've outlined in a series of HotZone shows how Hemingway, Ernest Hemingway, when he's going between Bimini and Cuba, and he's on this boat that's all scientifically hooked up, and people will ask him, what are you doing on this boat? Can't all be fishing. Like, what are you spending all your time observing? What he's looking at are ruins. And this will be the Cuban city that ocean engineer Polina Zalitsky finds in 2001. And she finds it while she's in Cuba, and Cuba hires her. She actually defects. It's a very interesting story with her, because she's behind the Soviet Union, and then she goes to Cuba, and then she defects to Canada. And she's, quite an interesting expert. And then her company that she puts together in Canada handles all of these different types of underwater mapping. And so Castro hires her supposedly to look for Spanish galleons. Spanish galleons is cover, in my opinion, for HotZone ruins. And whenever you see shows around this, like Gordon Cooper, for example, supposedly from space saw all these Spanish galleons. No, I think he saw ruins of Atlantis, and this is the big secret. Again, it's that difference between what goes on publicly and what we can speak about versus things that are operational and inside circles. So you might ask yourself, well, what is it then? What happens? Why would they try to hide that there's ruins under the ocean? There's a lot of politics involved with this. And if we go into Egerton Sykes' work, who was the British intelligence officer, who was real expert on this and brought forward the best people to work on it. What he said is that everybody was involved in the hot zone trying to figure that out. Now, we got the term the hot zone from people who anonymously gave it to us as a tip originally. And the idea was, when I spoke to them, they were saying that there were areas that they would go in as part of contracting jobs for like mapping the ocean floor. And they would get into certain places and they would say, if you see anything, if you see large structures, for example, you cannot say anything publicly. And this is an NDA for you to sign. And by the way, you can be prosecuted for doing this. And if there were military people who were doing this, then you could be court-martialed, literally. So they go under there, and let's say they see like something like the Giza pyramid or something, and they're in that area, say around the Bahamas, between the Bahamas and Cuba. They can't say anything about it. Now, I think this is very important because that got me thinking, well, what is going on about this? But what I was able to collect in terms of information around it is that the zone, it was like too hot to handle. The idea was they called it the hot zone. That's the area. And the crucial aspect of this is there's a number of different competing interests down there involved, and they're involved from Cuba, they're involved from Venezuela, they're involved from China, Russia, and America. So with all that going on, look, when you get into the hot zone, it's anybody's ballgame. You already have incredible drug wars going on down there. You already have remarkable smuggling, human trafficking, all kinds of things. So, and you also have things being blocked from coming in from different ports and things of this nature. So it's an incredibly dynamic place anyway. But the deeper aspects that happen there have to do with this Atlantis search and the ruin search. And Zalitsky came right into the heart of it when she discovered the Cuban city. So this is what Lester was aware of. And this is the antecedent to all the things that we see happen with Epstein and Maxwell later. Remember the show that we did recently on Margaret Sanders, who was the daughter of Colonel Sanders. What was she doing? Well, she was working with Marvin Minsky and trying to get into all the past around Atlantis. What did she do? She started the Mars Group, and that is marine archaeological research. And that was all about finding Atlantis off Bimini. She was part of the Casey work. And her son was the pilot, Trig Adams. And I've spoken to Trig. And Trig, he was involved in finding the early ruins on Andros. That led to everyone searching and finding the Bimini Wall. So, these people, there's a whole generational aspect of major families and people involved in this. And it's something that we don't hear about because the hot zone aspect was always the missing element. Now we have the hot zone piece. We understand, so it's a small group that can talk about it. The rest of everybody else is under NDA. They can't speak about it. That gives us a much better place to reason from. The Hemingway piece gives us a lot to reason from because we start to wonder, what would Hemingway have anything to do with Atlantis? And then if you go into the records at the ARE, you'll find Hemingway and Casey, the families were very close. So then it all starts to make sense. And why Ernest is there on Bimini and everything else makes a lot more sense than, hey, it's great fishing, which I'm sure it is. And, that was definitely a benefit from it. But why would Stephen Hawking be there? Well, top secret inside Jeffrey Epstein's Orgy Island summit with Stephen Hawking. I don't think that Hawking was there for sexcapades. I think he's there for a totally different reason. And what we find out is that they specially fitted a submarine for Hawking when Epstein had him down there for the scientific summit. And they got some remarkable submarine for Hawking to go down there and observe these things with. This was not for ocean exploration, in my opinion, at all. If you go deep into it, we did a show, of course, on Ghislaine Maxwell, where we found out that before she was grabbed there in Bradford, New Hampshire, at this house she had bought for $1 million in cash, she was using the name Janet Marshall as a pseudonym. Janet Marshall's name, who's a writer and a political activist, her actual name is Janet Atlantis. And she was, it's like this interesting tie over there with Janet Atlantis, because her mother was Octavia Atlantis. And of course, Octavia ate the eighth continent, Atlantis. There's a deep history there behind it. But somehow Ghislaine, in what she was doing, she knew that. How does that work? Well, there are a lot of weird stories about Ghislaine just before she goes in but just before they grab her, just before she's in custody. And of course, she was convicted recently, and they're going to have sentencing on Ghislaine in June. It's coming up. And of course, they were like, oh, you did all this human trafficking and everything else. But they don't prosecute any of the people that she did the human trafficking for or mention them. There's something very strange about the way they did this case. But nonetheless, there she is hanging out there. And we're going to make mention of some of the very unusual statements that she is saying while she's in prison. Let's back up for a moment to find out some other activity in the hot zone by Epstein. All right. Epstein traveled to Cuba at Castro's invitation, former Colombian president says. We didn't know that before the Colombian president let it out. Somehow that had slipped by. But it went on record because the Colombian president said, hey, wait, actually this guy was in Cuba and Fidel Castro had him there. Now, it's interesting to me that we do a timeline and Zalitsky, the ocean engineer, finds this Cuban city off the western tip of Cuba. And that area is San Antonio, Cuba, is very close to it. So here's the article in Miami Herald. Now, the meeting took place in 2003 after, they had a chance to kind of suss it out. Zalitsky basically gets booted out of that whole project. And then when she's hanging around and involved, what they try to do is put her in a Mexican prison to scare her. And she, in fact, goes back to Canada and, she continues to give interviews on the whole thing. She's a very brave woman, and I've communicated with her. I think she really had her run-in with this. She really went through a lot over it. And her findings are remarkable. I'll show some of them as they come up here. But one of the things I want to point out is the rest of this story. Millionaire Jeffrey Epstein, who was accused of sexually abusing minors, died last week by apparent suicide in a federal lockup in Manhattan. We all know about that. Traveled to Cuba at Fidel Castro's invitation, according to Colombia's former president, Andre Pastrana, who said Wednesday he accompanied him on the trip. Well, that's about as good a witness as you can get. Quote, amid journalistic revelations about horrifying and reprehensible sex scandals of financier Jeffrey Epstein, a trip of mine on his plane to Nassau, Bahamas has appeared to transfer to the final destination of Havana, Cuba, invited by President Fidel Castro. Pastrana said in a statement posted on Wednesday, Mr. Jeffrey Epstein left Cuba a day or two later. I stayed on the island. The trip to Cuba would have taken place March 2003. Okay, so like 2 years earlier, Zalitsky finds the Cuban city. Then we have Epstein sitting there. It's kind of like a power broker in the middle of all this. Now, you could say there's 100 different reasons why he could have been there. I'm going to track into how Epstein operated, especially when we find out that Alexandra Cousteau was involved and Marvin Minsky was involved. MIT scientist, Alexandra Cousteau, the granddaughter of the great Jacques Cousteau, who, after all, produced all the series about the search for Atlantis. He knew the undersea sees better than anybody. Well, according to Virginia Giuffre's case, in which Prince Andrew, was accused of sex with underage girl, and really, I mean, the case is just lock, stock, and barrels that he was guilty. It's very important because in that case, a couple of interesting breakthroughs happen that are crucial. One of them is that she identifies Alexandra Cousteau as being somebody that Epstein had targeted. That is, he wanted to get her into a compromising situation, and they wanted to blackmail her. And according to Giuffre, they did get her into compromising situations. Now, she was another one who was on this trip about, I'm going to save the oceans and things. But she knew a great deal because the Cousteau family knows incredible things, because nobody knew the undersea world the way that Cousteau did. Now, all those things, if Cousteau makes a great discovery under there, there's no guarantee that he's going to come out and share it with everybody. And he knew a great deal, and I'm sure was working generationally with his own people. In fact, his son, who was Alexandra's dad, died under mysterious circumstances in a plane crash. So the Atlantis link, the search for Atlantis, and it's fraught with all of these different detours and dangers. But one of the things that shows up in that Giuffre testimony, and again, I think that Giuffre testimony is a treasure trove because it mentions Minsky and it mentions Cousteau. We didn't have those on the record before. Why was Epstein targeting Cousteau? Now let's go back to Cuba. Now Epstein is there talking things over with Castro. Now we know he courted political figures and scientific figures. But if the object of what he was up to was getting scientists to study this ancient Atlantis piece, as I am sure was a big motivating factor, then all of these pieces start to make a lot more sense than just, he's working on high-end political sex blackmail. I'm sure he was. It's been proven over and over again that he was. However, there's too many trails around the Atlantis side, around the eugenics side, around the scientific side. You don't need all those scientists if you're going to do sex blackmail. Big deal. Are you going to get, sex blackmail on an MIT scientist, right? So what? I can see getting sex blackmail on a high-end political figure, but why would you want it on a high-end scientist unless you wanted to extract certain types of information from them? That makes more sense. So now we're getting into Epstein's thinking. Remember, I was saying we were going to be able to enter into their motivations tonight. This is the great thing that we can do, that we can actually get past the story about them and the things that they've done, which are true and on the record. But let's go beyond that. Let's go beyond this to their occult fascination with Belial and the Atlantean ruins. This is going to give us a whole new picture of what's happening there in the HotZone. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. Whew, now we're deep, we're deep into it. Miss Olivia, I've gone over for starting with questions, but I'm going to take another 15.
No, dude, look at all those papers that you printed out.
We know.
There's tons to cover.
But, how are you doing out there?
Great. Good questions.
Fantastic.
Waiting for you.
Go ahead. Go for it.
Okay, well, Chris Lothian wants to know, is it possible that Bush's Zapata oil company was really a front for exploring the HotZone?
Yes. Yeah, it is. I mean, there are a lot of resources down there in the HotZone. So I can see, everyone from China. I mean, there's investment people that are exploiting the Bahamas, Cayman Islands, and everything else. But I think it's weird that Bush had an oil company named Zapata, and then the Bay of Pigs operation was codenamed Zapata by the CIA. You have to see that interrelationship because Bush eventually runs the CIA. And, when you're thinking about this, you have to remember that Bush does weird things all the way back to the Kennedy assassination. One of the odd things is that he's the only political figure who couldn't remember where he was when Kennedy died. That's odd. At the time, he was an oil executive, and he was becoming a congressman. He's going to be a congressman from 64 to 66 in a small district in Texas. But there's odd things there about his presence. And so what he does when there's the presidential assassination is he calls into the FBI and he says, so-and-so, some Republican, had been talking about the killing Kennedy or whatever. And he places himself in a timeline so there can never be any question about him. There's a lot of very unusual threads linking Bush to the JFK assassination, believe it or not. I mean, those are real threads. And so Zapata and its utilization as the name for the Bay of Pigs operation, it's just, it's very, very unusual. And Bush, I think, holds a major stake in the aftermath of the assassination and also the UFO file, because it was, in fact, someone mentioned Bush Family of Secrets by Russ Baker. That's an excellent book. And Russ Baker used to write great stuff. He's like super into unconstitutional mandates now. I don't know what happened to that guy, but that was a good book. 2008, that's a long time. Sometimes 14 years can change people a lot. I've seen it happen with people.
Can we get a little scandalous for a minute?
Yes.
Okay. Melissa Claverta says Bush Sr. seemed asexual. But of course, there's a story about what he was into on the down low.
Well, here's what's interesting for me about Bush, which is one of the few, you see so many strange stories that float around in alternative circles. One of them was that Julian Assange was John Trump's love child or something. It's not true. However, the story about Barbara Bush being Aleister Crowley's daughter holds a lot of weight if you go back and backtrack what her mother was up to and the different groups, and that she was associated with Crowley. So when you think about that, that one holds a lot of key. And I have to say, she has an incredible, striking resemblance.
Indeed.
It's amazing.
I believe it.
So that's scandalous enough for me.
But I see that you kind of...
There are other stories about...
Go for it.
Well, there's
it's
other
the
stories.
Anniversary Show.
There's other stories about Bush being into teenage boys.
Yes, actually, a little further.
African American?
Yes.
Yes. And if you look, of course, the Kathy O'Brien information gives us a big clue around a lot of that. But there is a lot to work with there. And it is, when you think about the world that those people operate in, you have to, for us to get our heads into what their occult beliefs are, just imagine if you're operating, like a Hillary Clinton, who's willing to have, thousands of people die in Libya. So, she can basically, operate a crime syndicate. I mean, it's hard to look at those people and think this way, but this is the nature of that government situation and how those people just live outside of normal reality, and certainly Bush was an arch criminal from an arch criminal family, like the Clintons are an arch criminal family. Okay. A couple of interesting Epstein notes. Remember Epstein now, 2003. What is he doing? He's meeting with Castro. What has Castro done? He's just discovered an entire Cuban city through Paulina Zalitsky, right off of his coast. And it's not just a few ruins spotty in there. It is actually in a whole metropolis. That's the way she described it. And she sent submersibles down. She's a submarine expert herself, just like Ghislaine is a submarine expert and submarine pilot. And so when she goes down there, reporters ask her, what did they see? She said, I saw these hieroglyphs. And they were like Egyptian hieroglyphs? She said, no, they look like Mayan hieroglyphs. That's the stuff that they were seeing. So this culture, whatever it was, has everything involved with that, in common with that Mayan culture, but it's much older and it's underwater. So remember, again, Epstein, he's there in 2003. All right, the original Plato story talked about Atlantis set up in concentric circles. Okay, there's a depiction of Plato's story. Look at that. Think about those concentric circles. All right, Zorro Ranch, are you ready? This is Epstein's ranch in New Mexico. Look at this portion over here, or the concentric circles. That's something that he set up as a garden, but it looks exactly like Plato's Atlantis garden. Here's a close-up view. That's what we're talking about. Plato's concentric circle background, our friend Epstein's backyard in the Zorro Ranch. Zorro Ranch also had all kinds of figures of Poseidon, and the Atlantis imagery was thick, as it was also on Epstein Island. The submarine that he used to ferry all these scientists underwater to do God knows what is called the Atlantis submarine. That's it. Atlantis submarine ferrying people around for unknown scientific purposes underwater. This goes to Epstein's scientific program and also to Maxwell's TerraMar project. They're operating in the hot zone with the top scientists in the world, and they have the cooperation of Castro, the whole gigantic plaza that Americans can't get at because it's off the coast of in Cuban waters. And they even threw out Polina Zalitsky because she had really come out and talked to the press and said, yeah, this is what I found. And they couldn't even block the story. Even the New York Times reported on it. Eventually, they just, hey, let's hope this thing peters out. Now, I want to do a quick update on this because when we get into what's happening there in the hot zone, something's come up which is in the Gulf of Mexico. And somebody called this the gumbo hot zone, which I thought was hilarious. But it's off the coast of Louisiana, right above the Yucatan, almost a straight line above it. And here's the story. Amateur archaeologists may have found an ancient city off the coast of St. Bernard. All I know is somebody built a city 12,000 years ago, and it stuck out in Chandeleur. These islands are uninhabited, and this guy has been on this story for decades. This is the story that's coming out. These things are coming up to the surface. And the things that he found, mystery 12,000-year-old underwater city with pyramids and energy field found off U.S. There are the Chandeleur Islands. Those are the headlines. Some of the headlines are screaming. And I noticed there's two versions of this story. One version where they take him seriously, and then the second version where they take the same exact story and they try to make him look foolish. Nonetheless, the guy's been working on it for 4 decades. And it seems very, very interesting. And I believe he's found the equivalent. He's kind of the modern day equivalent of Zalitsky's find 20 years previous. Archaeologist claims to have discovered a 12,000-year-old underwater city with pyramided energy field. That's the archaeologist. These are his claims. Off the coast of Louisiana, a retired architect claims to have discovered an ancient underwater city complete with pyramided energy field. George Gillet, an amateur archaeologist, has visited the ruins of a 12,000-year-old city 44 times. This isn't something that's an anomaly that just came up. He is seeing these ruins, and he's using sonar to figure out what's underneath. All right. Imagery is coming up around this. Some of the imagery is he's saying these are large pyramids. And he's also saying that there's incredible effects, Apotheum style effects, Bermuda Triangle, magnetic disruption style effects that are taking place in relation to this. So let's get our heads wrapped around this. I've been talking to you about land rising. We're going to discover these things. It's inevitable. And they're going to have problems blocking this story. So what they're going to have to do eventually is spin it. They're going to have to say, you know, oh, this was a culture, and, you know, they're going to have to change the human origin story. They're working on this already. If you look at the work that Gigi Young has been doing around Mars, the thing that Joseph Farrell is talking about in our interview from November about Mars, you're starting to get the idea that this is a totally different human origin story they need to bring forward, and Atlantis is at the core of it. This is the thing they've been able to keep off, and the mystery school said, this is important for us to know. It's something for us to have. We need that awareness before they spin it as something else. So remember the core principle of the whole thing. That's the hot zone. And it also runs down through the Caribbean. And, you know, that's Bimini here. And that's where the city was found off the western tip of Cuba. So here's the way I connect these dots. Epstein, in his search for because we have to remember that he's a eugenicist also, and this comes up often. But in their search, they've decided that they need these Atlantean artifacts, and they need that connection with the Belial, the original Belial cult. That's what the obsession is all about underwater. They're not interested in preserving oceans, but they are also aware of massive earth changes, and they're aware of this land rising piece. And everybody is positioning themselves on that level. They don't talk about it. They're not going to talk about it in scientific journals, but they are positioning themselves for this rise in land masses as other land masses sink. These are the earth changes. You hear all about the Casey earth changes map. Well, he was talking about earth changes taking place, certain areas going down, He said at one point Georgia and the Maine was going to have tremendous problems, and some of that was going to sink. And parts of Japan. Well, we're looking at Fukushima. There's another earthquake there 2 days ago. I mean, Japan has these incredible earthquakes plus the nuclear issues. So there's something very dynamic going on in the world there. If we don't understand the land rising piece and its associated Atlantean ruins, we're not going to get our heads wrapped around this properly. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show. We're here in X Series 122. It's our 4th year anniversary of doing the show. And we have a lot of good stories on that, which we're going to share with you tomorrow night, because we're going to do a double hitter. And we're going to be back here at 8 o'clock tomorrow night. We'll be taking your questions shortly. I still have more to get through just on the Epstein part, and I have this whole piece on Autec. So I apologize, Miss Olivia. I'm dancing.
Keep it going.
I'm dancing as fast as I can. I'm missing the button that says I am a DJ and what I play. Okay, so you can go ahead and ask your questions. Miss Olivia's taking those. We'll take them shortly. Go ahead, though.
In all caps. Shorter to Cook 1 says, this is all blurred out on Google Maps. And Brandy Renee says, makes sense why they keep trying to flood Louisiana with, quote, totally natural super hurricanes, unquote.
Oh, well, that's really true. I'm trying to learn more about those islands, in fact. And one of the things, speaking of islands, I found interesting was that Epstein Island, St. James, and he bought both of them, Little St. James and Greater St. James. The other one's not talked about very much. I'm not sure why. But the one that's next to it is Water Island, and St. Thomas is in the middle. Water Island has a big Biden connection because his brother owns a massive landmass there. So for a long time in the mainstream media, they were trying to block this information, and they were giving out the story, oh, this is some, it's one of those things that's brought up in crazy Q circles and all that stuff. And, we had our fair share of that, but who was behind that stuff anyway? But what I will say is that I looked into it completely, and in fact, he owned, his brother, Jim Biden, owned everything, this whole section he owned in Water Island. So he is darn close by, and he's also deep there in the hot zone. And by the way, I got his deeds and all that other stuff. So if you hear anywhere that Biden and his brother aren't associated with Water Island, it's BS. He's there. And that's a fact. Another shot here. I think it's important. Okay. This down here, the Virgin Islands, Haiti, where we know there's so much activity going on. This is where they found the city, here off the western tip, and of course, Bimini and off the coast of Florida there. We have to get the understanding of this area. There's a reason why it's a political hot zone. Now we need to understand that from the point of view of what's going on with the hot zone ruins. Then a lot of this is going to make sense. Now, I've put across before that a lot of this is due to the Tuai stone, TUAOI. This is something that Casey identified, and he said, you know what? The Atlanteans hid records of this advanced power system, their X technology. They hid it in 3 places: Yucatan, Bimini, off the coast of Bimini, in a sunken temple, and under the Great Sphinx pyramid, the paw of the Great Sphinx, the right paw. And a lot of weird things happened in relation to the Giza Plateau, including the fact that some Casey people went there pretending to be interested in doing this and converted to the establishment and started talking against Casey, even though Casey Foundation had funded them going there. Very strange and very unusual things in relation to the Giza Plateau. However, the entire story, you might think, oh, well, you know, Casey said this power station was there, like, you know, whatever you want to think about it. But in 1964, there are records that the CIA penetrated and spied on the Association for Research and Enlightenment, which is Casey's foundation, to find out about Casey's Hall of Records stories and what he knew about Atlantis. So that is a government, you know, division, agency, the Central Intelligence Agency, spying on what should be, you know, oh, it's just the psychic information, whatever, right? There's a reason why they're there. Later, what's weird and what ties in this UFO threat thing is this guy, Jim Semivan, he goes on coast to coast to this CIA guy for 25 years. He's trying to say, well, you know, I had this encounter with an alien in my hotel room. And then the next day, a friend of mine called me up and he was going to a UFO conference at the Casey Foundation. And he said I should go there. I mean, this is a weird thing. So here he is saying that his CIA friend, who he also said was a guy who was on deep cover. So you have a deep cover guy going to a UFO convention at the Casey Foundation. I mean, what is it that's going on there that they want to find information about? And why is Semivan going on the record about that and then also saying, oh, there was an alien in my room and all this stuff? I'm telling you, the CIA is acting really, really strange around Edgar Casey and the UFO file. And I'm trying to get to the bottom of what they're up to because they are acting very, very strange, including this new wave of sending out these guys saying, oh, you know, John Ramirez, oh, I've been in touch with aliens, you know, 25-year CIA guy, right? Lou Elizondo, oh, well, when I was on the battlefield, I had remote viewing potential. This guy was supposed to work you know, for the CIA, operating in, you know, the UFO weird desk, basically, you know, and suddenly he's saying, oh, I'm, you know, I have a consciousness shift and I'm in touch with aliens. And it's getting ridiculous. It's such a bozo show. I think that they might be testing the bozo factor with this. But, you know, they've lied repeatedly for years, especially the last 3 years on the UFO file. And they weren't able to build up the UFO threat thing, although they had the help of Marco Rubio in portraying this thing as a threat. But watch out. When they're talking about this, watch out. Anyway, Jim Semivan's comment, my friend who was in deep cover for the CIA was penetrating a UFO conference at the Casey Foundation in Virginia Beach. Very interesting, isn't it? The interest of the Central Intelligence Agency around Casey. Oh, well, I guess Casey's not just some whack job psychic, huh? Because the CIA is putting time and men in there to undercover to try to find out what he was talking about. Gives you a little idea about what Casey was putting across. All right, now what's the interconnecting link? Here we are, underwater, Naval Underwater Systems Center. Autec, our friends at the Atlantic Undersea Test and Evaluation Center. There it is. That's a starfish they use in their logo. I'll tell you, there's a lot of unusual things about it. I want to read you a collection of UFO reports over Andros Island, directly where Autec is operating. Are you ready? Here's a couple. These are all compiled from books, and I'll identify the book. One of the books is Beyond Area 51, The Mysteries of the Planet's Most Forbidden Top Secret Locations, Mac Maloney. Okay, Andros, the Little Sun, SUN. One highly unusual sighting made in the 1980s came from the teenage son of a naval officer assigned to Autec. He and several friends were passing the time on a beach across from the top secret facility. It was a very dark night with no moon. Suddenly, the beach, the water, and a nearby harbor lit up as if it was daytime. Startled, the teens looked up to see a large circular object racing across the sky. They described it as moving very fast and being as bright as a little sun. As they watched it go over their heads, the object suddenly broke up, disappeared into 4 pieces. An instant later, those pieces completely disappeared, turning everything back to pitch black again. In all, the sighting lasted about 30 seconds. August 2010. This sighting was made by a civilian contractor who actually worked at Autec. He was looking at the beach on his day off when he heard a helicopter approaching. Looking up at the aircraft as it went over, he noticed a strange object flying nearby, only about 500 feet off the water. The object was metallic in color and moving west to east, had no lights and made no noise, but was moving extremely fast. As the witness watched in amazement, the object came to a complete stop over a nearby island. It hung there for a moment, suddenly shrank down to the size of a bird, and vanished. You know, and there's so many different sightings here. I'll read one more. In the summer of 1984, the naval support ship USS Yellowstone was sailing past Andros Island, heading north towards its home port of Norfolk, Virginia. The night was calm, 3 a.m. A sailor on watch noticed a green glowing spot on the water's surface about a mile in front of the ship. Brighter and more sharply defined than the bioluminescence most ships leave in their wakes, this spot was something out of the ordinary. By the time he radioed the ship's bridge with a warning, the green glow was less than a half mile away and coming on fast. The sailor thought it might be a research submarine, albeit a very speedy one, but whatever it was, he was convinced his ship was going to collide with it. A few seconds later, the green flash went by Yellowstone's starboard side, not 20 feet away. The sailor got a clear look at it for the first time and said the glow was actually a sharply defined object about 40 feet in diameter and perfectly circular in shape. It was at least 10 feet thick and 6 feet below the water's surface. There was no sound and no wake. By the time the others on the ship could react, the object had disappeared. There's so many of these, but they're all a stone's throw away from Autec. So I remember there's a classic case where there was a show called UFO Hunters where they became interested in Autec. And somebody warned them, that is the people putting the show together, that the show wouldn't go on if they did this. I found that very interesting because very recently someone who was working with me on the HotZone side, who's somebody who operates down there, they were warned off of working with me. So there's something operational there in the HotZone that they don't want good research on. In any case, one of the strange things that they got in that episode, and in fact, they put out the episode and the show ended immediately afterwards, is there was a guy who was a contractor for Autec and 10 years later came out and he told them that what they saw was on radar was a landmass suddenly form, and that the landmass was huge, miles across, and that there it was. So they were right in the middle of it. Now, I think it's important for us to realize that, this guy was well trained, and him going on the record, that's the kind of whistleblower that we need, not the kind of things that we've been seeing in the weird TTSA, CIA freak UFO world. These types of things are absolutely crucial, but what does that mean? What is it when a landmass comes in out of nowhere? What is it that's going on down there in the hot zone that they don't want us to know about? It's maybe so bizarre and far out that, we couldn't even imagine the fact that a landmass would appear. I remember, of course, from a 70s documentary, this really interesting captain of a ship who said they were going along there through the Bahamas, and out of nowhere, there was a gigantic platform in front of them. And it was just this huge structure. They couldn't figure out what was going on, but as they got closer to it, their own engines were failing. They were probably going to get sucked into the vortex of the Bermuda Triangle. But something is going on there in relation to this. And I've got more. And with that...
Is that episode of UFO Hunters the one with the guy who flew when he went through like a wormhole?
Yes.
Oh, that's such a good episode.
It is, actually. It's one of their last episodes. And
they got canceled because of it.
Yeah, I think it was an early expose on Autec. And I have to say that when you look at the history of Autec, and I have quite a bit of it here, it's unusual because 59, it's operational, and their histories are very thin and very spotty. Like, you can't really tell what they've been up to, a la Area 51. But I'll tell you, it's actually a better place to do secret research than Area 51, because once you get offshore, it's kind of anybody's ballgame. A couple of weird things that I found in relation to this, and the group that I think is tasked with following UFOs when they show up, that is, if they're not being created by Autec, which is a really plausible explanation. But this group, which is operational on Autec, is called the Dragon Slayers. This is their logo, and it's unusual, kind of tarot cardish, Miss Olivia, but we've got a sun, then we have nighttime, and we have a lightning bolt, which, remember, they always show the lightning bolt with a key to represent the X technology. But here, the lightning bolt is on its own, and it's killing this kind of like sea monster dragon, right? And those are the Dragon Slayers. That's their emblem. Another one that I found interesting, and there's a story about the Dragon Slayers here. HS-11 prepares for historic sea duty. Dragon Slayers ready for Big E deployment. The crew of Dragon Slayer number 611 prepares to take off March 1st from an aviation rescue swimmer certification exercise over the St. Johns River near NAS Jacksonville. It's the first flight for the Seahawk since receiving its special Showbird paint scheme. There's something about helicopters with the Dragon Slayers, and it's for fast UFO response. Very interesting group. I'll be looking into them more. The Autec badges are interesting.
Najat said, I'm going to grab that the tongue of the dragon and the lightning bolt form an X.
True.
Let's bring it back.
Yes. Oh, no, I'll get it. That's good. Let's take a look at this. All right, here's the next badge. Let's take a look at it. One, we've got this here, which is the actual Autec Ranges emblem. It's unusual for a lot of reasons, but it's sort of floating on a darting missile of some kind. The other one's even more interesting, as it represents Poseidon coming out of the ocean, the king of Atlantis. And these are both assigned to Autec. The Dragon Slayer's logo, again, as Najat pointed out, there is X-STEGANOGRAPHY there if you take the dragon with the lightning bolt. But nonetheless, the night and day imagery, the lightning bolt, and the dragon itself, I think, are giving us some indication of what the group is up to. Now, we've read some of the strange encounters that have taken place there. We've looked at their logo. I think the starfish is also unusual. But in relation to Autec, here's the official word on it: Naval Undersea Warfare Center, Underwater Hydrophone Location Survey. Now, there are NASA records because NASA interacts with Autec on a regular basis. And here's another weird thing. Did you know that on Andros, the other thing that's operational on Andros besides Autec is NATO? So we're starting, I think, to get a picture that Andros, which is perched right there off in the HotZone, right off of Bimini, is surrounded then by international military and also our very secret underwater Area 51 group. The Atlantic Undersea Test and Evaluation Center is a U.S. Navy test range located on Andros Island, Bahamas, in a division of Naval Undersea Warfare Center. It's a war group. Newport, Rhode Island, is the home of that warfare center, about 45 minutes from here. The headquarters of Autec is located at a facility in West Palm Beach, Florida. Autec's primary mission is to provide the U.S. Navy with deep water test and evaluation facility for making underwater acoustic measurements, testing and calibrating sonars, and providing accurate underwater surface and in-air tracking data on surface ships, submarines, and aircraft. Many of these programs are in support of anti-submarine warfare, undersea research and development programs. That's the kind of official explanation for who they are. Here, another explanation is it's a laboratory that performs integrated three-dimensional hydrospace aerospace trajectory measurements covering the entire spectrum of undersea simulated warfare, calibration, classifications, detection, and destruction. Its mission is to assist in establishing and maintaining naval ability of the United States through testing, evaluation, and underwater research. That research is very involved with the UFO file, and we can see from all of the UFOs that are taking place around there, it's quite unusual. Now, what's interesting is remote viewers who have looked at that area, at some of the top, the very best, have seen basically your typical gray type alien operating in what look like saucers underwater there. So there's something very strange about Andros, its location in relation to Casey's prediction about Atlantis there and all this UFO activity. Not even to mention NATO, because now, once you throw NATO into that mix, it's a really strange situation. But there we are with Andros. We're right in the heart of the hot zone. And Andros, is very sparse. It's got a very small populations, 8,000, and maybe most of those are Autec employees, because it's mostly a lot of mud, a lot of water, a lot of trenches, but it's large. It's much larger than Bimini. So it's a perfect perch for whatever it is that they're up to. And, we understand even a little bit about Area 51 at this point. If we really understand it, I think most of Area 51 has gone off to places like Moon, Pennsylvania, which is something we try to put different geography on the map with this show. But I have to say that Autec, I think, is the most super secret facility I've ever come across. Even though it's public and we know what it is, it's really a hiding in plain sight piece. And so I have more to get to in relation to Maxwell, but Miss Olivia, I'm going to ceremoniously turn it over to you.
Okay, I'm going to start with the symbolism.
All right.
Okay. So one, Nightly said seahorse. Horses were the symbol of Poseidon. And Al-Qaeda says the seahorse, the male gets pregnant and cares for the young. The female lays her egg in his stomach pouch. Very interesting. I remember that there was something really funky about seahorses.
Yes.
So, but I think that's really interesting that horses are the symbol of Poseidon.
Interesting, yeah.
Okay. So David James said that reminds me of that mystery military patch with the dragon and Earth satellite slingshotting out from Earth to Draconis. Very weird patch. We should find that. That sounds
yes.
great.
That is an interesting one.
Thermopstraful says the Chinese lease property on Andros. I did not know that. You did know that.
The Chinese are pretty heavily vested down there. There's a lot of banks, not on Andros, but right around there. That's weird too, of course. And there's been incredible corruption, throughout, and also incredible vacation. There's that whole tourist attraction of the area. So, as I said, you have so many things going on in the hot zone that can be known for so many different things: entertainment, drug running, ancient ruins, Casey's prediction, the Cuban Missile Crisis, all of these different type of kind of hot button geopolitical things seem to be circulated right there. What we don't know, this is what gets back to the whole Russian piece with Cuba also. This is always left out, and this is why the hot zone research is so crucial, and that's why the Epstein Maxwell piece, because remember, Maxwell's dad was an incredible yachtsman, and his whole thing was about living on the ocean. But he was an incredible spy for a number of different agencies, and he, that whole thing about him as a Mossad agent, therefore Ghislaine is Mossad agent, and therefore Epstein's a Mossad agent. I mean, they all seem to work in that regard. I think tagging them just with Mossad is too limited. They are deeply, deeply, involved with the series of intelligence groups. One of the interesting articles I was able to get in relation to Ghislaine Maxwell was what happened just before she moved up and was grabbed by her what would be your husband later. By the way, that's a shot of something right, one of these ghost rockets off of Andros. And there's a whole thing about the Andros ghost rockets. But one thing about Maxwell, which I think is interesting, is she was living in New York, and she was hiring these Swedish assistants, and they would hire through, they would kind of network with other Swedish assistants. They were all men, and they all looked about the same. They were about 5'10". They had blonde hair and blue eyes. And this one guy was her last little assistant, he's the one who gave all this information. He said, at one point he asked her, why are all your assistants, do they look just like me, basically? And she gave him a look like a real huff, like, don't ask me questions. And she was constantly paranoid about being assassinated, which I find really fascinating. But also fascinating is the dog that he took care of, which was her dog, was named Captain Nemo.
And he looked like Toto.
He did look like Toto. I'll show pictures of him. But Captain Nemo, in the Jules Verne stories, discovers Atlantis. He has a whole connection in with Atlantis. And, we don't have big tracks of Ghislaine. We have her talking about what she was trying to do with the oceans. We have her talking about Cousteau and what an important influence he was and all the rest of it. But it's hard to get into the heads of these people. But when she uses pseudonyms like Janet Atlantis to move to Bradford, New Hampshire, and when she names her dog Captain Nemo, we're starting to get that picture of her influences and what they are and where she's coming from. Yes.
I always have a hard time. Mitekuye Oyasin. Is DJ aware that the employees of the main contractor for Autec, Amentum, are all pictured making an X in photos with their arms?
Interesting. Yes, Amentum is a very weird, interesting contractor group. And I'm glad you brought them up. I didn't have enough to bring them into the program today, but I was researching them. So I'm glad you mentioned that. I didn't see the X-STEGANOGRAPhy that they were using, but that would be interesting. If you want to, actually email that to me at dj@darkjournalist.com if you have that picture. I'd love to see it. Here's another thing I want to point out, which is the other group that does contracting there is an Alaskan tribe, and it's the majority of the contractors there. And that tribe in Alaska, they go under the name the HotZone, which I find interesting. And they show the hub in red, like it's hot, and zone. And they're the ones who handle everything at Autec. So the question becomes, when you're doing this kind of research, when do they start using the term hot zone for that area? I've been able to track it to about 1999. But that contractor group is, I think, an indication. Yeah, we do contracting in the hot zone. We'll keep the secrets. Yes.
Slip Dissident says, Olivia, Maxwell family crest has porcupine in the middle of an X. Porcupine is Eki DNA, the missing link between mammal and reptile.
Whoa. I didn't know that, actually. I wasn't aware of that. We know that Maxwell himself and the family is very, very interesting. And the sisters were deeply involved with software. Some of the things that have come out on the independent media side, getting into the background of Maxwell and Epstein, they've done a really good job, actually. And I think the regular mainstream media has done a totally lousy job and just painted them almost as caricatures. Like she was a madam and he was a high-priced pimp. Like it's not, it doesn't get into this at all. A lot of the intrigue around them is, what was he doing up here, for example? Close by, there are these groups that he was donating to at Harvard who were dealing with eugenics. And there's a whole story that came up about him having this idea, we don't know if he ever tried it or not, of doing kind of test tube insemination of dozens of different women in order to figure out kind of the best type of eugenics offspring that he could get by doing it. I mean, he was very, very deep on this, and there's a reason for that goes far beyond just his weird perversions, which is no question about that. Yes.
Mike Brady, is Podesta connected to Autec?
Well, Podesta being special assistant under Clinton, President Clinton, and then Hillary Clinton's and also chief of staff for Obama. I mean, this guy is deep. And I haven't seen him show up in relation to Autec, but if he's in, he's very deep on the UFO file himself, and all that early stuff with DeLong is all Podesta Clinton operation. That's a shot of Ghislaine coming off the submarine after it surfaced, by the way. Some of those shots give us that idea. Remember, she has that very interesting licensing and is known as a very good helicopter pilot and also an excellent submarine pilot. Ghislaine Maxwell created fake identity to buy her $1 million New Hampshire hideout, prosecutors say. Janet Atlantis. That might give us some way of starting to reason out who she is and the secrets and the cards that she's still holding there in prison. I'm going to get into a couple of her very unusual statements while in prison, and including some that came out in November that were very prophetic. And so we're going to get deeper into Ghislaine as we go. Yes.
Now, John Laundrie, do these elites think owning areas around the hot zone, they have the rights to whatever is discovered underwater?
Well, they're closer to it. They get options, and I think what they're looking for the best possible positioning. I don't think that they all know where the land is rising. I think they've started to get a handle on it through, we're obviously looking at different pieces, because if there's that piece that's off Louisiana that's leaning down in a straight line toward Yucatan, it's still pretty far away, but it's in the Gulf of Mexico. So it's right outside of what would be in the hot zone. So we've got a whole series of structures there. You have a series of structures off Cuba, and then off Bimini and Andros. That's where all the Casey research centered. And isn't it interesting that our own undersea test facility is right where Casey readings were? I mean, it wasn't there when he was given the readings, right? So I think, they've shaped a lot of the geography down there in terms of what it's for. And we know unusual things have happened on Bimini. Martin Luther King used to go there. He wrote the I Have a Dream speech there. Other politicians spent time down there. The Kennedys spent time off Bimini. So yes, it's an attractive island, like many of the islands in the Bahamas. But when you think about it on that deeper level, it goes, we're going on a different level. Yes, Miss Olivia.
Captain Harris, Cliff High's webbots predicted land rising too. His, quote, spiders may have collected that from conversations about Edgar Casey.
That's interesting. I know that he's picked up on some of the X part independently, but he's right. If he's talking about land rising, then he's right. I think I wanted to put land rising on the map because it's right. It's essential. It just sits there in the middle of the mystery school information, and it's been just kind of left there. Like people don't know what to make of it, but there it is. And I had some very interesting, one of the things I did just before in ramping up to start doing this kind of reporting was I met with a group, with an individual who was channeling a group in Canada. And it was all because there was a guy named Stan Fulham who was, this ex-NORAD officer who had made a prediction that October 13th, 2010, there was going to be this massive sighting. And the magazine that I was working for at the time was a lifestyle magazine. And for some reason, I got a fax of that at the time. No, it was actually an email. And then later, there was a fax that came up around it. And I was like, who are these people and why are they predicting this stuff? And then when it came to pass, I thought this is really strange. So I tried to get in touch with him, and we were going to arrange an interview. And then he died within a month of that sighting, somewhere around November, so later November 2010. And then I was like, oh, that's too bad, because I wonder where he, how that prediction came up. So it turned out that the group he had got it from was from an individual named Rick Thurston. And I spent a number of hours interacting with Rick Thurston, and I recorded something like 14 hours of material with Thurston, who was an Casey-style channel. And he talked about land rising off the East Coast. And he talked about how China and Russia would be involved with trying to claim it. So this is something that's operational, and we should be aware of it, because the more we understand it, the more we'll understand the strange chessboard moves in relation to it geopolitically on the surface, but also the rising truth of that whole piece. And then things like what we're looking at with Epstein and the fact that he was taking Stephen Hawking underwater and especially prepared Atlantis submarine, all that stuff is going to be a lot more clear for us. You know, right now, to just look at those situations, we're operating blind. Epstein's dead, and Maxwell's in jail making cryptic remarks and comments, which I have right here, and I'm going to read shortly. But basically, we're left in a huge gap of who their clients were, what kind of power they were wielding, who are they giving this blackmail information to, but what was it all for? What's the scientific part about? What's the underwater part? What's TerraMar? You know, unless you understand the HotZone piece, you can't understand any of that other stuff. So we'd be left, you know, on the traditional side. It's just like, you know, bad man does bad thing, then kills himself, and then woman who helped bad man goes to prison. That's nothing. You know, we don't get anything from that. We need the spectrum around the activities of these people, and we are getting them by tracking things like Marvin Minsky, who, you know, through Virginia Giuffre's testimony, who they had used as a sex slave. This is somebody who accidentally has given us a huge trip vision into the HotZone, because Alexander Cousteau's in that picture. Cousteau's directly related to the hunt for Atlantis. Yes, everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. We're going deep, deep here in X Series 122. It's our 4th anniversary of doing the show. It's so great to be here with so many of you tonight. We're going to take more of your questions and lay more of the show on you. Yes.
David Termina, DJ, do you suspect that deep state factions are worried that land rising in the HotZone will somehow disrupt their control of society?
No question. I mean, first of all, if the general public gets a handle on the idea of an advanced Atlantean culture, they'll remember their own potential. That's a big problem if you're trying to control 7 billion people. 2, it's actually a bigger realization than UFO disclosure for a lot of reasons. I mean, the UFO disclosure is a big thing. There's no question about it. But the idea that we have a much older culture that was advanced, more advanced than we are now, and that a spiritually advanced group fought a technologically advanced group, and that they basically blew each other up over the course of 50,000 some odd years of history, is gigantic. I mean, think of how much bigger that is than just us understanding the Egyptian culture, which is so fabulous, but is obviously, from the people who studied it in earnest, a legacy culture.
Can I chime in for a second?
Yes.
I mean, I immediately thought about Graham Hancock saying that we are a species with amnesia, and that land, you know, so
That's
it
really
would be a catalyst for awakening.
Yes, exactly.
And remembering.
Yeah.
And they do not want that, because it will make us ask uncomfortable questions, and to a certain extent, it's that our power is lost with that amnesia, right? And
Absolutely.
The last thing they want is for us to have any power.
There's no question. It's a whole awakening piece, and we're gonna have a little fun here for a second. All right. When you punch Bimini now into a search engine, you get this drag queen who is on Drag Race. It is a huge, important figure, but I'm going to tell you some weird stuff that comes up around this person. Okay, this is the drag queen, Bimini, right? So if you're looking for Bimini, you don't get the Casey information, the two-eye stone. You get this drag queen. Okay, fine. Now, this Bimini was in a video by Boney M. And the video was called Majestic X.
Mm.
And it was part of this Rasputin thing. Now we have Bimini, the drag queen, with Majestic X. And it's all about the Rasputin thing, which, there's something weird about that. When I see the Bimini stuff and it's so prominent in the search results, it strikes me. I have mixed feelings about that. Yes, Miss Olivia.
Alex Baldwin says, is the jacket because of the awe in Autec? And Jordan Banner wonders if the awe in Autec is about the symbol for gold on the periodic table.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, they have the traditional examination, a reason for why it's in there, Atlantic Undersea, but
nothing is as
no, definitely not. Autec is it's a very secretive group, and whenever anyone's tried to cover them for magazines or for TV shows, whatever, they never respond. But they have a very inviting. I've got their employee manual about what you're supposed to do when you get there, and the types of things that are available there, internet-wise, and all the rest. It's very interesting to me, and I do feel that very much like the Rachel airlines that go back and forth to Area 51, there are corridors and ways of finding out about Autec, but it's incredibly secretive in truth, although it has a public website and things of that nature. It has not, we haven't even scratched the surface on that one. All right, I'm going to throw in a couple of quick things since I mentioned the...
Wait, I'm going to throw this out. So, Wally Tango Foxtrot says, we are in awe of DJ's jacket.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, I appreciate that. Well, it's me and old Blue Eyes on that one all the way. All right. Speaking of outfits, take a look. It's Ghislaine Maxwell in her American flag swimsuit. All right. This is odd. This whole photo shoot was very unusual. That's why the whole thing about McQueen and all that, there was a crisscross here with it. But, she had some very interesting, like, glamour type shots that were going on. But a little bit about that Swedish assistant and some of the things he saw. So here's an article now. Is she hiding in a submarine in a bunker? The hunt for Ghislaine Maxwell. Remember when this was going on? And that was a drawing of her from like some court proceeding. But here's what they were saying. The death of Jeffrey Epstein sparked a worldwide search for his former associate. How did the woman now known as inmate 02879-509 keep such a low profile for so long? And there was a lot of interesting stories about what was happening there and what they were figuring on doing with her and what her kill switch was and all the rest. Now, this is the dog walker. And unfortunately, I have a picture of the Toto dog who is named Captain Nemo. That's not him, but I'll turn that up. So his name is Alpso, and they're saying it offers a rare glimpse into Maxwell's world before she swapped New York for Massachusetts in order to live with Borgerson. Now, Scott Borgerson, as we know, was the CEO of Cargo Metrics, and they also dealt with, the seas and delivery and all this stuff. One of the weird things that I uncovered in the Ghislaine Atlantis episode is that when he was talking to someone about, Cargo Metrics and what it did, he made a very obscure reference to Atlantis, and he said something along this line that, like, it's as if Atlantis had rose out of the ocean with all of its treasures intact. And I found that's a weird thing just to throw out there. This is somebody who obviously has thought about or talked about this, but he's also involved in shipping predictions for Antarctica and things like that. Very unusual. So this ex-dog walker says Maxwell paid him $300 a week to stay in the finished basement of her East 64th Street apartment. He was tasked with feeding and walking Captain Nemo. And he said, Maxwell enlisted men to come to New York on a 3-month tourist visa from Sweden. And that she was always incredibly paranoid about delivery people coming in. One time he let a delivery person in. Let me see if I can find that one. And what happens is she freaks out so badly, she grabs the delivery person and she takes his ID and she scans it. She tells him to stay there until she finds out exactly who this guy is. And she believes that she's going to get whacked, is basically what's going on there. But I think the Alpso story is interesting, and it gives us that little window. Let's see if there's anything else worthwhile on that. Yeah, one of the interesting things also that comes out of this is that he finds that she has an incredible temper. So if even the slightest thing goes wrong, it's almost like an OCD thing. She flips out dramatically. So that maybe gives us a little bit of insight that I hadn't heard before in relation to Maxwell. Yes.
Darla Cash, who has her submarine now?
Well, you know, Borgerson, she signed over a ton of, I think something like $20 million to Borgerson, who was officially her husband. That was hard to get info on, too, because they were like, oh, it's her friend, it's her boyfriend, it's her husband. And I think he married her in a hurry, so they wouldn't have to testify against each other. But there's a lot of there's a lot of weird things in relation to that. I would say if anyone could have the answer on where the submarine was, I know that the company Atlantis Submarine is something that they actually leased the submarine from Atlantis to do the undersea tours with the scientists. But I don't know about her submarine in particular. It's a good question.
Rehoboth Farm. This is great. I've never heard this before. The name Ghislaine means pledge. It comes from the medieval, an ancient practice of exchanging members of royal families to cement a treaty like a hostage.
Oh, wow. That's her middle name is Noelle, which I found was interesting. I didn't know that. Her sister married a guy who started what was called the Southern California Skeptics Society. And this guy was very interesting, and he was courting all of these scientists the way that she was. Now, what's interesting also is that instead of doing skeptic type stuff, he had high-end scientists in there like Crick and all these other ones. And this is in the 80s. And he is going through and being like, what about the Bermuda Triangle? What about black holes? What about all this other stuff? Really far out, intense subjects. So that family is very well versed in woo topics for sure. And I found that piece particularly interesting. Yes.
Catales, Swedish guys, her version of Men in Black.
Well, it's interesting. This is the quote from her assistant, Alpso. And he says, quote, I guess I fit the description because all the guys who had been there they looked really Swedish, looked blonde, tall, blue eyes. They all had that in common. He said he was 24 when he took the job. The ex-dog walker says Maxwell paid him $300 a week and let him stay in the finished basement of her townhouse. Right.
I'm sorry. Were they sexually intimate?
No, the assistant. No. He was just.
So this is just a fetish. She just likes hiring, maybe having Aryans work for her.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing. So this Nordic type, if you think about it, and we just think about our friend Epstein being so involved with this eugenics idea, and then she keeps all of these kind of Nordic types around her. It's pretty interesting. Let's face it. That whole story, and I think if there's any other pieces on her, there's another thing that someone else said in relation to her. Oh, yes, this is actually what I was suggesting in relation to her sister who had married this person who pursued these subjects. Here's the actual thing. So his partner is this guy named Al Hibbs in this story. This is from 1987 New York Times story. And he says, the point is not just to debunk, said the group's chairman, Al Hibbs, who recently retired as the senior staff scientist of the Jet Propulsion Lab Technology and Space Department. So JPL, Jack Parsons Lab, right? So there's the Caltech piece directly in the family, which I think is crucial. He says, quote, "The real point is to show people how they can go about checking out things for themselves. Ordinary people can check the validity of some very strange propositions." Seckel is the guy that she married. And he says he worries that the Southern California Skeptics, which is loosely affiliated with the National Committee for Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, will be perceived as a bunch of negativists. Quote, "Why not look at the real mysteries, the ones for which there are at least some evidence?" Remember, this is Ghislaine's brother-in-law. He said, citing the black hole theory as an example. "A black hole, scientists believe, is a star that has collapsed under its own gravitation and is so dense that not even light can escape from it. Look at the idea that time slows down as you enter it, that a watch is going to move at a different rate for an outside observer than for someone in a black hole," Seckel said. "Or how about the idea that you age infinitesimally more slowly on the first floor of a building than the top floor?" Think of how these people operate and the way that they're thinking. This is a mystical, paranormal group. And that's in the 80s. We can imagine how, that went further along. But that's her brother-in-law being part of this society and working, again, courting these scientists, looking for something, right? Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. Here we are in X Series 122. It's Autec in the HotZone. Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein, The Search for Atlantis. We're going to be taking more of your questions in our 4th anniversary show here. And just a reminder, we're also going to be doing a show tomorrow night at 8 o'clock, big part 2 extravaganza. Yes.
Rosterman the Seer, what would be the benefit of Epstein not dying? You think
you mean had they kept him alive?
A lot of people think that he's alive somewhere.
Well, the story is so absurd. It's like the magic bullet. The story that he just hung himself and their cameras failed. That's ridiculous. It reminds me, there's a story, a parallel with Oswald when he goes to Mexico City. And what happens is when he shows up at these embassies, all the cameras fail. So at the Russian embassy, the Cuban embassy, suddenly the cameras fail. And so they don't have any pictures of him. But the pictures that they do have of when he shows up is a totally different person. So when cameras fail, it's a big, gigantic red flag. I would check the cameras on Ghislaine's floor immediately. But I think in his case that he had to be rubbed out.
There are many people who believe that he is not dead.
He could very well be alive because so much of reality is staged. But I can see them having good cause to remove him because he's no longer useful. And there's no way to keep him perpetually quiet. So, there's a reason that meme was out there for so long. What's interesting is the risk that they took eliminating him so publicly, the most high-profile prisoner probably in the world, except, our friend Julian Assange, and that he would die and that they wouldn't have a special watch on him. It's ridiculous. I mean, it's so absurd for us to accept that. Why wasn't there a massive investigation involved? That was Trump's Justice Department let that one roll. And I think he suffered for it because that same Justice Department was able to let everything roll, including rolling him out of office. Yes.
Mr. DeWeedy, DJ, how does the Maxwell, Frank, Molina, Parsons, L. Ron Hubbard, Crowley connection connect?
Well, it's pretty interesting. And Molina is interesting because he goes out of this aerospace realm and into art. So I'm particularly interested in him. Parsons, I think the interest there is the OTO side. And I think it's quite possible with his involvement with Israel early on that he was assassinated either by Howard Hughes' forces who thought he had sold them out or by early Israel. The kind of deep state in Israel, but it seems to me that they regarded him as kind of valuable. So it would be my impression that he was more of a sitting duck on the Howard Hughes side, because the Howard Hughes operation became controlled by the Central Intelligence Agency. And that's their specialty, assassination. Yes.
David Termina, DJ, was Epstein, quote, brought in to the UFO file through Nixon's network of deep state operators? Merritt, after all, was a sexual blackmail agent, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think they found someone with such a low scruples in Epstein. Epstein is not a genius by a long shot. He loves to surround himself with intelligent people. He's a very unusual figure, and it is William Barr's father that helped him somehow get into the university circuit, and then that leapfrogs into the financial circuit. I think the background is so spotty on Epstein that, it reminds me of one of these deep state players. But, what happens is, and this is something I got from Professor Scott, which is the Central Intelligence Agency loves to use marginal figures. They specialize in it. And you think sometimes, why would they use so-and-so? It's their specialty. So Epstein falls into that category for me, but I don't think it was the Central Intelligence Agency that was running him solely. It's something else was happening there for sure. Yes.
The dot connector. Maybe the fake alien invasion will come from the sea?
Mm-hmm. Well, you notice that DeLong and the other, the CIA people around TTSA mention, there's a potential that this is an undersea threat, and that those aliens come from underwater. They're ready with that one too. And I think it's interesting that they want the threat. They haven't decided exactly where it should come from. On the other hand, there's so much about the underwater realms that we don't know anything about. I think the biggest secrets there of our past are important. I think the Two-Eye Stone, Bimini, Poseidia connection with Casey is a crucial track. And that's where I think we're going to get a real glimpse of that history that's been hidden. And that's why I think the HotZone is such a too hot to handle subject. And that's why I think they have Autec down there. Yes.
Catherine Harris, was the creation of chimeras what Epstein had in common with Atlantis?
Absolutely. I think this is what they were after. And I pursued this a little bit in my Casey Atlantean Secret episode about the things, because what we're talking about is the ability, and what they're looking for is Emilius had this ability to project beings. And then the Belial people studied Emilius. This is Casey's story of Atlantis. And they studied him and scientifically figured out how to do what he was doing, but they couldn't project it the way that he did. So Emilius was a sort of supernatural being, and they figured out through scientific means how to create the same types of things. But then they went beyond, and they decided to make these different forms and kind of monstrosities in the Frankenstein type thing, including the idea that they may have resurrected the dinosaurs. As far out as that sounds, there's a Casey reading that mentions this great meeting that takes place 50,722 BC, which is all about ridding the earth of these gigantic beasts. And then he says, well, this was the result of these Atlantean scientists messing around doing it. So they had created this problem. And then the problem that they had designed to solve it was a gigantic death ray, or it's the use of the two-eye crystal as a death ray. And so this is where the negative thing came in. And what happened when they used that is it set off all of these explosions in the inner earth, volcanoes and all the rest of it. That sparks the first destruction of the island into 3 islands. And Casey gives the names of the islands, Arianog and Poseidia. Poseidia is the island that the piece of it that's left is Bimini and Cuba and that whole piece. That's where the Amelius group was, and they had a powerful, they had the powerful technology, but they used it for different reasons than the Belial group. And the Belial group apparently was centered kind of closer to Spain, because again, that landmass of Atlantis, on one side the Gulf of Mexico, on the other side the Mediterranean. So that's where it's occupied. And that fits with Plato's description of outside the Pillars of Hercules. It's right in the Atlantic, in the heart of the Atlantic. Now, that piece, though, the part I think that's so crucial is when Casey says, well, there's a Poseidon temple coming up off Bimini. That's where all this problem is. That's where the attraction and the attention is going. Not to mention the fact that Casey made strange statements about Bimini, like that there's more gold, beneath Bimini than that's in the world circulation. I mean, that's also a powerful incentive for people to keep that track very secret. But the two-eye stone is the goal around which the deep state is looking for, and the kind of Belial cult out of Atlantis is what the Epstein eugenics type people are after. If we can connect those pieces up, you get a dramatically different picture of what was happening down there. Then the kind of sex slave stuff and all these things make sense on a totally different level, beyond just, hey, she was a great pimp and he was looking for blackmail. That's true. But that's not the whole story of what they were up to, because again, there's too many missing pieces. The scientific part doesn't make sense then.
No, and why are they allowing the sexual shenanigan part, right?
Yes.
And it is obviously to obfuscate the scientific part.
Yes, exactly. Why there's not a real good investigation. They're just like, oh, he was a hanger-on. It doesn't really make sense. When you get into Alexandre Cousteau's testimony, Virginia Dufresne's testimony about Alexandre Cousteau, you see them targeting Cousteau and trying to get her to go along with things and be compromised. And she wasn't initially up for it, but apparently they got her into compromising situations. That, I think, is fascinating. I have a quote also from someone who got into, there's a book where they got into this a little bit, and I have a few quotes from it here. Let's see if I can grab some. You can keep going.
I just love this question. Michael Humphrey, do you think the two-eye stone is powering CERN?
Well, the two-eye stone is very much like CERN, in my opinion. What's interesting also about CERN is a lot of these other ones, these, like China and Japan and India, they want their own large particle collider. So that, tells me that the weaponry, the idea of it as weaponry is paramount. Okay, I'll get this in. The book is Epstein, Dead Men Tell No Tales. Reveals for the first time shocking details about Epstein's connection to the global academic and scientific elite. This is the piece that we're after if we can connect it with the HotZone piece. That's what we can do. Authors Dylan Howard and Melissa Cronin found that in 2006, Epstein hosted a conference at the Ritz-Carlton at St. Thomas. We've exposed this conference in a few episodes. It attracted the likes of Stephen Hawking. During one night of the conference, guests were shuttled over to Little St. James for a barbecue and submarine tour, God knows what else. According to reports, the sub was custom fitted for Hawking's wheelchair. This is interesting too, because this is the Atlantis submarine that they're taking him down, because they want him to go around and see these HotZone artifacts. A photo of and also measure a magnetic anomaly going on there, which relates to the two-eye stone and the Apotheum piece. According to reports, the sub was custom fitted for Hawking's wheelchair. A photo of the event shows him being personally attended by a young blonde with her hair in a ponytail. I showed that picture earlier. Despite the tech luminaries who visited Little St. James, however, it was never really the hub of scientific pursuits for Epstein. Instead, Epstein cultivated scientific connections. His 10,000-acre Zorro Ranch outside of San Fe, Mexico. That's the one with the very interesting Atlantis concentric circles in the background. Our important people were mostly scientists. Deidre Stratton, the woman tasked with recruiting young massage therapists for Epstein in New Mexico, revealed in Epstein Dead Men Tell No Tales. Jeffrey helped back their research. He would often have, like the guy who won the Nobel Prize for discovering the quark in quantum physics. She continued, a guy that won the Nobel Prize for a DNA discovery, people that helped to found Microsoft. Those were the kinds of people that were there, scientific and brilliant. They would have very erudite conversations over meals. You'd pick up a word here and there. Obviously, you couldn't really hear the whole thing, Stratton said. They would invite them to lunch with Ghislaine Maxwell. And Ghislaine would have this tablet, and she would write down the facts that they would tell them. So she's compiling from these conversations all these different things. At one point, she told me, when you get the information from an expert, then you get rid of them. Think of the mentality. This is how they think about it. They're looking for something. They're looking for some scientific piece to go along with their thing. They don't want that person engaged in their project. They don't want to let them in on all of it. They want their expertise and then get rid of them. As an agent of the Mossad, Epstein shared highly sensitive scientific developments with the Israeli government. For more chilling details, that's the book, Epstein, Dead Men Tell No Tales. That testimony alone is worth them doing that book. I don't know how accurate the whole book is, but what this woman had to say is fascinating, because we get Ghislaine's mentality, which they want this expert. They want Cousteau, and they want to be able to pump out of her what her grandfather knew about the undersea terrain in relation to finding Atlantis. And then they want to be able to blackmail someone like that, just like they wanted to blackmail Marvin Minsky. They didn't get the chance to, according to Jeffrey. But remember, Minsky was involved with Margaret Sanders, and Margaret Sanders was involved in finding Edgar Cayce's Atlantis. These are the pieces. This is the puzzle piece that's crucial when we consider the scientific track. That's how we'll get to the bottom of this. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist X-122 show. We're here. We're going to take 2 more questions. And don't worry, though, because we're coming back tomorrow night with part 2 of the 4-year extravaganza of the X series 4th year anniversary. And it's great to have all of you here. The questions tonight are off the charts. Miss Olivia, you're up.
David Tormina, DJ, what do you make of the idea that an ancient Martian culture came to Earth during Atlantean times and are the ancestors of the Hebrews written about in the Bible?
I like the Steiner cosmology, which is that we've gone through different evolutionary cycles relating to those planets, and that we actually inhabited bodies that suited the environments. And this is like Cayce's story as well, that when you go into different environments like Venus, you take on a body. It's not exactly like a physical body, although the body of the Venusians supposedly is the closest to us physically here on Earth. But as you move through these stations, they're like different points of development, and then you reincarnate on Earth. That's the story of the mystery schools. And so it does correlate in some ways with what you're saying. But it seems, and I think we have to think about them coming in through portals in different types of energy bodies, and not fully like they're physical Martians and they come here. No, I think that it's a projection. It's like a soul stream, and it takes on the matter that is associated with the sphere that it's involved with. And what I find so fascinating about Steiner's work is that what's going on with Ahriman is the harmonic wave is trying to deflect that natural moving through the planets and then reincarnating here and creating the natural spiritual evolutionary track, is trying to divert it. And that's where the whole 8th sphere information, which we're going to talk about tomorrow night, that's where the whole 8th sphere part comes in and is crucial. Because when you understand that that stream of development is being interfered with, so we can't develop, and that it's going to seem like development, but it's going to be in Ahriman's 8th sphere, I understand it's quite far out, but really, if you correlate that with the idea of the spiritual teachings and Maya as illusion and things like that. Then the eighth sphere, that's kind of the Western version of that same samsara, wheel of karma, and these types of things. They start to link up. The Western religious tradition as well, the esoteric Christianity really, I think, captures both the Eastern side and that Christian, the esoteric Christianity is, I think, the core now of the Western initiatory tradition. And that's where it's headed. As a matter of fact, when Theosophy tried to turn back under certain types of influences to the Eastern initiators, the problem was that the Eastern initiators had worked 3,000 years so that the Western initiators would have their moment on the world stage to move the culture forward. So if we went back, it would be like starting all over again, and so the idea is we couldn't go back and become Eastern, the great Eastern expanse that we got. We had to, as the West, take from the East the wisdom of the ages, the wisdom of the masters, the spirit of meditation, reincarnation, and these things, and incorporate it into that Western thought. And that's what the Western mystery traditions are trying to do. They're trying to lift us up through that. And, just as an aside here, don't you feel that generally that, people aren't just in a general way, they're not required to think very deeply about things. And I think this is one of the fascinating things that we're able to do here with the great legacy of the information that's come through, that there's so much more to life. And there's so much more of, the spiritual that's there to explore, and that they've really taken our consciousness down to these blocks. And I think inside of those blocks, we're easily containable. So therefore, we need to, we need that Western influence of the Western mystery schools to take us out of this, because we're in a position where it's kind of do or die, and you can see that with the great powers of the civilization to mind control the populace, that we need, when they say great awakening and all that stuff, that's an old term, and I agree with it. I think that there's an awakening at hand, and it has always struck me that too often humanity concentrates on very low-level aspects and does not, there's a great thing in the Gurdjieff work about, a man lives in a great mansion, and it's a saying from the East, with all these rooms and libraries and hidden things, and that he spends the majority of his time in the kitchen and the basement. So, we need to explore the other rooms. And, we're getting a little bit of that now. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. Miss Olivia, you're up. The last question.
I will. And on that note,
yes,
I think a lot of people, there's a wonderful, it's sort of childish and lovely that, they want to become initiates of a mystery school. And, I know, when I first started my spiritual journey, you have delusions of grandeur of what's going to happen. And, it really is, spirituality is humbling. It's humble work, right? But the fact that doesn't mean that things aren't happening behind the scenes. You know what I mean? So you don't have to be initiated per se to work with the guides. You can call upon them and ask for a relationship. You can spend time in meditation and be dedicated to it and on your own, and have them start to guide you if you tune in, if you hone your skill of listening and start obeying. That's the other important thing, which I have learned recently, is that, when you start following their guidance, they will be louder. The guidance will come more frequently and it will be more obvious. And so, start with your personal relationship with guidance, and don't worry about, you ever having, being presented with, an invitation to join some mystery school. It's,
I will say this, and that's fascinating. You're absolutely 100% right. I will say this, though, that you can find yourself sitting across the table from someone who is an initiate from a mystery school and totally be unaware of it. It does happen. And I've always talked about this very unusual incident that happened to me when I was driving from New Mexico to Boston and had to stop in Ohio because car trouble. And this very unusual person showed up. And when I was in a bookstore in the middle of this mall, nowhere, late at night, like 8:30 at night, late for a bookstore. And I was looking for a Gurdjieff book, and this guy came in, and he had a Grateful Dead t-shirt. It was a Pink Floyd t-shirt. And he just looked like some kind of a hippie burnout for sure. And there was an obscure book, A Herald of the Coming Good, which is a Gurdjieff book. I was aware of it, and I was looking for it, thinking, I knew it was actually not a print book. It's hard to find. And there I was thinking, oh, here are all the traditional Gurdjieff books in here. I'm looking for this Herald of the Coming Good. And this person came up to the ladder I was on and starts talking to me and about the Herald of the Coming Good, and mentions that maybe the book is there. And, it's just such an odd conversation. And then he leaves. And then I go up to the counter and say, the guy's giving me a weird look. And he said, that guy's never been in here. I've never seen him before. And he didn't buy anything. And I can tell you, it was the whole evening after that was strange. But that, there's definitely a mystery school person. And the way that they acted was unusual. And I've always remembered that little interesting. And on that note, I am going to give you the last question.
Okay. So these are two connected questions. Jordan Banner, are we all the Amelia's group, and how do we fight back? And World Change Brief says, question, DJ, some say we are winning, but what do you think?
Yeah, well, I think humanity as a whole is under tremendous pressure right now. Some of that's astrological, and a lot of it is the consolidation of power into the hands of a smaller and smaller group trying to squeeze and harvest humanity. And there's a very deep occult aspect to that as well. Yes, the people in the ideas room, this is all the Amelia's track, and these are the things. And we meet people who are on that side of things in this Atlantis. There's no question. We seem to be surrounded by a lot of them. And I think a lot more would be if they could be awakened around it. And it comes to every person in their own way. The Belial thing is very obvious. We're surrounded by the Belial. That's the whole unconstitutional mandate thing, the, calling everyone a domestic terrorist, Stepford Biden, the whole push for war in Ukraine. It's there. It's we've seen it before with the incredible authoritarian governments. And the way I think through it is through awareness, really, and with not identifying with it. I think that's crucial. So, they say be in the world, but not of the world. I think that's a very important way to think about it. The other one, I think, is don't leave the world will leave you. And that means the kind of, superficial aspects of the world, which we're surrounded by. But, our parents went through that also. And I think, this is just a developmental stage that's gotten into such a crucial aspect through the advances of technology. It's thrown us into a spiral where we need to find something deep with our own humanity. And a lot of that for me is being able to look at things properly. And I think that's what dark journalism is all about for me. If you can get the real picture of things, you can make real decisions, and you're not, brainwashed with entrainment or over-identified in one way, or, all the virtue signaling and putting down other groups. I mean, when we think of the extraordinary things like Trudeau, for example, was saying, about how the views of the truckers shouldn't be tolerated. Think about that. That could have come from Adolf Hitler. Chrystia Freeland, like, we're going to seize their assets. Thank you, Eva Braun. I appreciate that. This is what you're looking at. And so that is the core of that. It is the might makes right, as Casey says, the Belial group. That's what they're going for. And they think they have the technology to do it. In terms of are we winning or not, it's hard to say, but I think we're on the right track if we're, calling things out. So yeah, that's a tricky one though.
I just wanted to quote Roosevelt Media News, who says, humanity tends to have its greatest awakening under the greatest amount of pressure. I think that is certainly true. Wow.
Well, it was certainly true after World War II. I think there was a lot. And, they'd gone through World War I, replaying that whole disaster. So it's crucial because we have an upside down leadership situation. I actually think people on the ground have a lot more awareness and want a much more advanced society. And on the top levels, we have, like freaks like Gates and Zuckerberg and, psychopaths like Fauci and people who will exploit their position and their power, for gain and for the manipulation of humanity. It's an old story, but right now I think it's at a perilous point. And, we're doing our best in the middle of it all. And it's a one day at a time exercise. And that's what we're doing here. Yes.
Yeah, the other thing is we may not, I'm always on the fence of my responsibility for saving the world, sort of, whether it needs me saving it, ultimately what we have to ask ourselves, again, being humble, what do I have control of? Where's my agency? And, for many of us, we can't balance our checkbooks, right? There are so many things. It's sort of, you have to work your way up to more responsibility. And also, not all of us are fighters. Some of us are more sensitive. We're healers. And you take responsibility there, right? And you increase your capacity there. Other people love to fight, right? And good for them. We need fighters. We need those types of warriors. So you have to know your dharma, and then you need to increase your capacity to contribute.
It's true. Everyone has a role. And I'm often amazed at the inner qualities that people have, sometimes latent, that become manifested. And, it's just, I'm blown away. And I see it over and over again, the remarkable qualities in people that I meet. So I'm on the side that thinks if we can get the right kind of understanding and information, we can raise ourselves up. And, that's the whole thing. The Casey work was always about attunement and service. So you have the great attunement going on, whether it's meditation or spiritual thoughts or whatever, and then that's fulfilled in service. One of the remarkable things that he said when they asked him, what should I do to increase my esoteric abilities and all the rest? And he said, well, you push the elderly in their wheelchairs along the beach at night when they can't do it for themselves. It was an act of service was the way in to understanding that. It wasn't, some elaborate ritual or so. I mean, it was the idea of service. So attunement without the service, tricky. It's very tricky because then you have all the energy, but if you don't pour it back out, then it's almost like it overflows. So I think that's maybe a good place to start with attunement and service. And with that, Miss Olivia, I turn it over to you.
Okay, we have so many generous donations tonight. So Tomoteko Firgal, Stephen, Gillenjoy R, Donald Smead, here's a new one, Angel P, thank you. Eurythmia's Fun, Shiny Gee, Mark Petrie, Global Atlantis, Rosterman the Seer, Todd Jensen, Erica Swenson Elliott, IC Butts, Richard Weber, Debbie McAdoo, John Thayer Sr., Bob Bennett, Machike 57, Thomasine Richards, Dumbledore's Army, Chrysachella, David Attack, Doreen Hewitt, Norman Smith, B. Brax, Joe Sampson, a cult fan, PRBR, Bob Bindert, Pierre Duranlo, Medley Childress, Empress Anaya, Havardian, Brady Savage, and Diana Dawn. Thank you so much.
Remarkable. Wow. I really appreciate it. And, your support for the show really helps us keep going on the track that we're on. And you've shown remarkable support over the time that we've been doing this and just the whole time I've been doing Dark Journalist. So thank you very much. We really very much appreciate it. And to all our subscribers, thank you for keeping us going. We will be back tomorrow night at 8 o'clock for part 2 of the 4-year anniversary extravaganza, more mystery schools and more Atlantis, because that's the track that we're on. And I guarantee you some surprises there. I'll do a couple of shout outs since I'm here with everyone. Jennifer and Bucks, it's great to see you. El Kiter, of course. Oh, right, I can highlight. I forgot. I always forget that. I like that one. Wow. Cove Channel. Yeah, I agree. That's about where we're at. Najat Madri, it's great to see you, Najat. Frank Monday, good to see you, sir. Glad to hear about Joseph. Yes, he's doing a lot better. He's working too hard. Sundari Bliss, it's great to see you, Sundari. Chicago 007, John Guilfoyle, Happy Hermit, Golden Girl.
Do we get another new jacket tomorrow? Maybe.
I'm thinking about it. Although I think I've already shocked you with this one. It would be hard to top that. Maybe no tie. I'm doing. Love is the Law, Frank Monday. Tim
You
Houston.
do have a David Bowie tie.
True. I didn't think about that. Karen Carpenter. Beth Hansen. Oh, it's great to see you. Fantastic. Ms. Tree. Tomatok. I think I have the pronunciation right. You'll tell me. Gypsy Moon. Thank you. It's great to see you. Nick Malone. Sir. I know Gigi was out there. It's great to have Gigi, of course. Kat Goida. Thank you for being out there tonight. Scarlet Fire. Excellent. Kate's out there tonight. It's great to see you. Bug in the Garden. I think a cult fan was out there. Was
Absolutely.
A cult. You got it. Good. I'm glad. Karen Carpenter, yes. Great show. Thank you. I really appreciate it. This is really, this is so interesting. Blavatsky said something that stuck with me. You are immortal, your eternity to explore the universe. Morning, afternoon, headshot. What a great one. Smash that like button before you go, says Roosevelt. I agree. Thank you so much, Roosevelt. It's great to have you out there, sir. Let's see. Blue Man says, thank you, Olivia. Excellent. Olivia, bravo.
Thank
Bravissimo.
you.
What a great job.
Kat Guida.
Yes, I did. I called out Kat. Kat's
Mm-hmm.
always doing excellent. Debbie McAdoo. Whoo! There's Gigi. Hey, Gigi, it's great to see you. Excellent. Bob Bendit. That's the coolest jacket, says Alice Austin. Thank you. It's just something I slipped on. What can I say? Luke Walker, I just got back. Gonna be a good show to watch. I agree. You don't believe what you missed. Great show, Daniel and Olivia, and Ideas Room. See you all tomorrow. We'll see you all tomorrow night at 8 o'clock for part 2 of the 4-year extravaganza. Are you ready?
So are we picking up where we left off, or are we switching gears?
There's going to be some surprises, and there's going to be, the first hour, I'm going to wrap up everything from this show for sure. But I have more on the Mystery School piece, which I think is going to be crucial in all this. And again, you want to go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for our newsletter. That's the way for us to stay in touch through all the incredible censorship that we've been seeing. And that's a free newsletter, and it just lets you know once a week the shows that are coming up. We have remarkable interviews coming up for you as well, and some very exciting documentaries and events as we get into this fascinating spring. And we just had, of course, Alana Freeland on the show with her kind of new book on geoengineered transhumanism, remarkable piece. And I think that's one I really want to see people picking up. We will see you all tomorrow. I was going to say next week. Hey, thanks so much, everyone. And remember, it says end broadcast, but you know.
I wanted the final word. So Catherine Harris says, always superb brain-entertainment. I've never heard that term before, but I love it.
Now you're talking. Excellent. Renee Newton. Michael Gale Media. There he is. Tom Miller, Carl Young, Britannia Young. Candace. Renee Newton, Scott Webb, Fubar Fighter, yes. Luke Walker, thank you. Thank you so much. We will see you all tomorrow night. And Saturday night will be, Saturday night's all right for fighting, as they say. Have a great night, everyone.
Okay. See you tomorrow.
Bravissimo.
Let's eat.
Deborah Blair, it's great to see you. Hug a tree hugger. I like that.
That means GG.
Godspeed to us all. I agree. Good night, everyone. Thank you very much. I'll see you tomorrow. Tomorrow. Annie loves you tomorrow.